The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Wellington Foods headquarters fell silent as Sarah Wellington rose from her chair. The October sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows cast her shadow long across the polished mahogany table where 12 board members waited for her next words. Her tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders, but her voice remained steady. I hereby submit my resignation as CEO of Wellington Foods, effective immediately. Gasps echoed around the table. Richard Henderson, silver-haired and shark-eyed, leaned forward with a predatory smile. And I'm also submitting a formal proposal to purchase the Midwest division, including all planned rural expansion at market value. Henderson's smile vanished. You can't be serious. Completely serious, Sarah replied, her gaze unwavering. I'm going to build a company my father dreamed of, just not from this boardroom. Henderson's eyes narrowed as he slid a folder across the table. Before the board considers your proposal, they should know about your new friend in Millbrook, the mechanic with the criminal record. Sarah felt her heart stop. On the table lay a mugshot of Jake Morrison. Fraud, embezzlement, theft. Henderson continued, each word falling like a hammer. Is this really the kind of person you want to stake your future on? The room spun around Sarah as 12 pairs of eyes turned to her, waiting for an explanation. 12 days earlier, rain lashed against the windshield of Sarah Wellington's Mercedes as lightning split the sky over Chicago's skyline. Inside her penthouse office, she stood by the window phone pressed to her ear, watching the storm mirror her mood. The Yamamoto representatives just canceled the meeting. Her assistant, Melissa, reported, her voice tense through the speaker. They're requesting you personally oversee the negotiations. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. Reschedule for next week. I'll fly to Tokyo myself if necessary. Henderson's already suggesting to the board that your absence shows a lack of commitment. Of course he was. Richard Henderson had been gunning for her position since her father died 5 years ago, waiting for any misstep to convince the board she wasn't fit to lead. Tell Henderson I've grown Wellington Foods from 50 million to 100 million in 5 years. My commitment isn't the issue. Sarah ended the call and turned to the wall of windows overlooking the city she'd conquered. At 33, Sarah Wellington had everything she'd worked for: control of her family's company, recognition as one of the youngest female CEOs in the industry, and a luxury lifestyle that announced her success to the world. What she didn't have, what she never seemed to have, was time. On her desk sat a framed photo of her father, James Wellington, standing in front of the original family bakery. His last words to her played on repeat in her mind. Don't forget where we came from, Sarah. Success without purpose is just noise. She tried explaining to him that expansion, acquisition, and market dominance were the purpose. The Wellington name now appeared on products in grocery stores nationwide. Wasn't that what he wanted? But the disappointment in his eyes had never fully faded, even as cancer took him 5 years ago. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another text from Henderson. Board meeting tomorrow 9 a.m., succession planning on the agenda. She slipped the phone into her pocket and grabbed her coat. The quarterly reports could wait. If Henderson wanted to fight, she'd be ready. First, she needed the presentation for the Chicago meeting. The files were in her office downtown. As she rode the elevator down from her penthouse apartment, Sarah scrolled through her calendar. 3 meetings tomorrow morning before the board showdown, a lunch with potential investors, the afternoon flight to meet the Yamamoto representatives, and then back to Chicago for the quarterly financial review. Sleep would have to wait until the weekend. Again. The doorman tipped his hat as she strode through the marble lobby. Terrible night to be out, Ms. Wellington. No choice, Frank, she replied with a tight smile. Business waits for no one, not even Mother Nature. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning Chicago's streets into rushing rivers. Sarah's driver held the door to her Mercedes, but she waved him off. I'll drive myself tonight, Carson. Go home to your family. The surprise on his face reminded her how seldom she made such concessions to personal lives, her employees or her own. But tonight she needed the control of being behind the wheel, of determining her own direction, even if just for a 30-minute drive. 40 minutes later, Sarah's Mercedes cut through the storm windshield wipers, fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Her GPS indicated she was still 3 hours from the meeting location. As the storm intensified, she pressed harder on the accelerator. The Yamamoto deal represented a $30 million expansion into Asian markets. Missing it wasn't an option. Her phone rang, the sound connecting through her car's Bluetooth system. Melissa again. Henderson sent an email to the entire board questioning your leadership style. He's attached employee satisfaction surveys showing declining morale under your direction compared to your father's tenure. Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Those surveys were confidential. How did he access them? I don't know, but it gets worse. He's suggesting a vote of no confidence at tomorrow's meeting. A flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, revealing sheets of rain so dense they transformed the highway into a ghostly tunnel. He won't succeed. The financials speak for themselves. Sarah, Melissa hesitated. Some board members are responding sympathetically to his email. He's playing the family legacy angle, saying your father would be disappointed in the company's direction. The words hit like a physical blow. Using her father against her, Henderson had sunk to new lows. Before Sarah could respond, a notification lit up her dashboard display, warning engine temperature critical. Perfect, she muttered, easing off the gas as steam began to curl from under the hood. Melissa, I'll call you back. The Mercedes shuddered, then lurched, the engine sputtering before dying completely. Sarah guided the car to the shoulder as momentum faded, hazard lights blinking feebly against the darkness. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she could just make out a sign, Millbrook Bystander 3 miles. She'd never heard of Millbrook, but it would have to do. Sarah grabbed her phone, relieved to see she still had service, and searched for the nearest towing company. 3 miles outside of Millbrook, Illinois, Jake Morrison wiped grease from his hands as he closed the hood of Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick. The garage smelled of motor oil and the coffee he'd been nursing since 5 that morning. It's not pretty, but she'll run another year, he told the elderly woman who beamed up at him. What do I owe you, Jake? He named a figure well below what the parts had cost him. Peterson had lost her husband last winter, and her fixed income barely covered her medications. That can't be right, she protested, knowing full well it wasn't. Jake shrugged. Senior discount. After she left, Jake checked his watch. If he hurried, he could pick up Emma from kindergarten himself instead of having her wait at after-school care. His 5-year-old daughter had been drawing pictures of just the two of them lately, always with a noticeable empty space where a mother should be. The school counselor had suggested quality time might help. The garage phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Morrison's Auto Repair, he answered, tucking the receiver against his shoulder while gathering his tools. Mr. Morrison, this is Principal Davis from Millbrook Elementary. The woman's voice held the careful neutrality that made parents' hearts sink. There's been an incident involving Emma. Jake's tools clattered to the workbench. Is she hurt? No, but she's in my office. She defended another student from bullying, physically. 20 minutes later, Jake sat in a tiny chair across from Principal Davis's desk, Emma's small hand in his. Her dark hair was coming loose from its ponytail, and there was a scuff on her cheek, but her eyes, so like his own, held no regret. He was pushing Lily and calling her names because her clothes are old, Emma explained. I told him to stop 3 times like you said to do, Daddy. He didn't listen. Jake squeezed her hand. What happened then, sweetheart? I pushed him back. Emma's chin lifted. Hard. Principal Davis cleared her throat. While we appreciate Emma's desire to protect others, physical responses are never appropriate. I understand, Jake said, though part of him swelled with pride at his daughter's sense of justice. Mr. Morrison, the principal continued, lowering her voice. This is the 3rd incident this semester. I wonder if Emma might be struggling with her mother's absence. Perhaps counseling. We're doing fine, Jake interrupted more sharply than intended. Emma knows she can talk to me about anything. The principal's sympathetic look made his jaw clench. He'd heard the whispers single dad abandoned by his wife, struggling garage owner, but he and Emma were managing. They had each other. I'll discuss appropriate responses with her, he promised, softening his tone. Outside in the truck, Emma's small voice broke the silence. Am I in trouble, Daddy? Jake looked at his daughter, his brave, fierce little girl who saw unfairness and tried to fix it just as he'd always taught her. No, sweetheart, but next time find a teacher before you push anyone. Even if they're being mean, even then, some problems can't be fixed with pushing. Emma considered this with the gravity only a 5-year-old could muster. Like how Mama leaving couldn't be fixed by anything. Jake's heart clenched. 3 years since Linda had walked out claiming Millbrook was suffocating her, and Emma still found ways to blindside him with her perception. That's different, Em. Your Mama. He trailed off, never knowing quite what to say. How do you explain to a child that her mother had simply wanted more than a small-town mechanic, and the daughter they'd had too young could offer? I know, Emma said, patting his hand with surprising gentleness. She needed big adventures. But we're okay, just us, right, Daddy? Right, Jake managed, starting the truck. And I've got a surprise for this weekend. Emma's face lit up. What kind of surprise? If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, but it involves that special thing you asked for. The special thing was a trip to the county fair, 2 towns over, the luxury given their tight budget, especially with Emma's medical bills piling up. But seeing her excitement, Jake knew he'd find a way to make it work. He always did. As they drove home through Millbrook's quiet streets past the boarded-up buildings that had once been thriving businesses, Jake thought about the medical bill he'd found in yesterday's mail. Emma's condition required expensive medication their insurance barely covered. The garage was bringing in just enough to keep them afloat, but one major expense could sink them. He needed a miracle, or at least a wealthy customer with an expensive car problem. As if in answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Morrison's Auto Repair. "Daddy, your work is calling," Emma said, holding up his phone. Jake answered, listening to his part-time assistant describe a stranded motorist with a luxury sedan who'd just been towed in. "Mercedes S-Class with engine trouble," the assistant reported. "Driver seems particular." Jake glanced at Emma, then at the darkening sky that promised a stormy night. "Tell them I'll be right there." Emma tugged at his sleeve, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Can we go see the fancy car, Daddy, please?" Jake smiled, ruffling her hair. "Sure thing, Princess. Maybe this is our lucky break." As they turned the truck around and headed back toward the garage, Jake allowed himself a moment of hope. A high-end Mercedes meant a customer who could afford proper repairs, not the discounted rates he so often offered to locals. Maybe this was exactly what they needed to cover Emma's medication this month. What he couldn't know was that the storm hadn't just delivered an expensive car to his garage. It had brought a whirlwind that would change their lives forever. Perhaps the miracle he needed had just arrived in a German-engineered package. The tow truck's headlights cut through the rain as it pulled into Morrison's Auto Repair, the Mercedes S-Class hanging behind it like a wounded animal. Jake stood at the garage entrance, Emma's small hand tucked in his, both watching with undisguised curiosity as the luxury vehicle was lowered to the ground. Even in the dim light and pouring rain, the car's sleek lines and pristine finish spoke of wealth Jake rarely encountered in Millbrook. "It's so shiny, Daddy," Emma whispered, her eyes wide, "like a spaceship." Jake squeezed her hand. "That's German engineering for you, sweetheart." The tow truck driver jumped down from his cab, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Lady's pretty worked up about her car, Jake. Says she's got some important meeting tomorrow." As if on cue, the Mercedes door opened and Sarah Wellington emerged, phone pressed to her ear, one hand ineffectually trying to shield her designer suit from the downpour. Her stiletto heels clicked against the wet concrete as she approached, her voice carrying over the storm. "No, Melissa, I need those files tonight. Email them to me immediately. And book me a car from—" She glanced up, taking in the modest garage with its faded sign and the mechanic standing with a little girl at his side. Her expression shifted from determination to dismay. "I'll call you back." Jake stepped forward, extending his hand. "Jake Morrison, welcome to Morrison's Auto Repair." Sarah hesitated before taking his hand, her grip firm but brief. "Sarah Wellington, your tow service said you're the only mechanic in town." "That's right. Millbrook's not big enough for competition." Jake gestured toward the garage. "Let's get you out of this rain and you can tell me what happened with your car." Inside, the garage was warmer but hardly luxurious. Tools lined the walls and the concrete floor was stained with decades of oil spots. A small office area in the corner held a desk covered with invoices and a coffee pot that had seen better days. The space smelled of motor oil coffee and the faint sweetness of the candy Emma kept in her backpack. Emma darted ahead, dragging a small wooden stool from beside the workbench. "You can sit here, lady. Daddy says it's important to be polite to customers." Sarah looked down at the child, momentarily thrown by the gesture. "Thank you, but I'll stand. I need to figure out how quickly my car can be fixed." Jake was already examining the Mercedes, hood raised as he assessed the damage. "What happened before it broke down?" The temperature warning came on then, steam from under the hood, and then it just died. Jake nodded, his hands moving expertly over the engine. Cooling system failure. Looks like your radiator's cracked, and he leaned in closer. Yep, water pump's failing too. This isn't a quick fix. Sarah's perfectly composed expression faltered. How long? Parts will take at least a day to arrive, maybe two, then another day for repairs. That's not acceptable. I have a board meeting tomorrow morning in Chicago that will determine the future of my company. Yeah, Jake straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. I understand you're in a tough spot, Ms. Wellington, but I can't change the laws of physics. Your car needs significant repairs before it's safe to drive. Then I'll rent a car. Nearest rental place is in Grantsville, 40 miles away. They closed at 5. Sarah checked her watch, 7:30 p.m., and suppressed a groan. What about a taxi service, Uber Lyft? Jake shook his head. Welcome to rural Illinois. We've got exactly one taxi in Millbrook, and Ed Johnson doesn't drive at night anymore since his cataracts got bad. Emma, who had been watching the exchange with open fascination, piped up. Ms. Sarah, are you hungry? Daddy and I were going to have spaghetti for dinner. You could eat with us while you figure things out. Sarah opened her mouth to refuse, but Jake cut in. Emma, Ms. Wellington probably wants to get to a hotel and make arrangements. He turned to Sarah. There's a motel just down the street. Nothing fancy, but it's clean. You can stay there tonight, and in the morning I can drive you to Grantsville to rent a car. Sarah looked between them, the kind-eyed mechanic with grease on his hands, and the little girl with her earnest offer of spaghetti, then back at her disabled Mercedes. For the first time in years, Sarah Wellington found herself without a backup plan. Fine, she conceded, pulling out her phone. I'll call this motel and then arrange for a car service from Chicago. Good luck with that, Jake said, not unkindly. Cell reception gets spotty here when it storms like this. Landline in the office is more reliable if you need it. As if to prove his point, Sarah's phone displayed no service, where bars should have been. She stared at it in disbelief, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She was stranded in a town she'd never heard of, with no transportation, spotty communication, and a critical meeting hours away. This cannot be happening, she muttered, rain dripping from her once immaculate hair. Emma stepped closer, looking up at Sarah with solemn eyes. Sometimes bad things happen, so good things can find you. That's what Daddy says. Jake cleared his throat, embarrassed. Why don't we get your luggage from the car, Ms. Wellington? Then I can run you over to the motel. Sarah nodded stiffly, following him back to her Mercedes. As Jake popped the trunk and lifted out her expensive leather suitcase, she couldn't help but notice how the rain had soaked through his thin work shirt, outlining broad shoulders that spoke of physical labor rather than corporate posturing. You have a remarkable daughter, she said, surprising herself with the observation. Jake's expression softened. Emma's something special, too smart for her own good sometimes. Her mother must be proud. A shadow passed over Jake's features. Her mother's not in the picture, hasn't been for 3 years. Before Sarah could respond, Emma called from the garage doorway. Daddy, I'm hungry. Jake hefted Sarah's suitcase. Duty calls, let's get you settled at the motel. The Millbrook Inn was a far cry from the 5-star hotels Sarah frequented on business trips. The lobby consisted of a small desk behind which sat an elderly man watching a baseball game on a tiny television. The carpet had seen better decades, and the air smelled faintly of pine-scented cleaner and mothballs. Evening, Jake, the man greeted without looking away from the game. Who's your friend? Hey, Walt, this is Ms. Wellington. Her car broke down and she needs a room for the night. Walt finally turned, eyebrows rising as he took in Sarah's designer suit and Louis Vuitton luggage. Well now, don't get many city folks passing through. Sarah stepped forward, credit card in hand. I need your best room, please. Walt chuckled. All our rooms are the best, ma'am. They're all the same. 5 minutes later, Sarah stood in a room that confirmed Walt's assessment. A queen-size bed with a floral comforter dominated the space, accompanied by a nightstand lamp and dresser that had probably been there since the Reagan administration. The bathroom was clean but basic, with a shower stall rather than a tub, and towels that had been washed so many times they were almost transparent. Jake set her suitcase by the dresser. It's not the Ritz, but Walt runs an honest place. I'm sure it's fine for one night, Sarah replied, though her expression suggested otherwise. The diner across the street opens at 6 if you want breakfast. I'll be by around 7 to take you to Grantsville for that rental car. Sarah nodded, already pulling out her phone in hopes of finding a signal. Thank you for your help, Mr. Morrison. Jake, he corrected. Nobody calls me Mr. Morrison except the bank when they're sending late notices. The casual reference to financial struggle caught Sarah off guard. In her world, such admissions would be considered a weakness, something to be hidden at all costs. Yet Jake had said it without shame, just a simple statement of fact. Jake, she amended, 7 o'clock then. After he left, Sarah tried every corner of the room seeking cell reception. Finally, by standing on the bed and holding her phone toward the window, she managed to get one wavering bar enough to send a text to Melissa. Stranded in Millbrook, IL, car broken, working on solutions. Prep board for my absence. The response was immediate and not reassuring. Henderson circling like shark. Bored restless. Need you here. Sarah collapsed onto the bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. For the first time in years, events were completely beyond her control. The realization was both terrifying and oddly slightly liberating. At 9:30 p.m., a knock on her door startled Sarah from her laptop, where she'd been frantically trying to prepare for the board meeting using the motel's painfully slow Wi-Fi. She opened the door to find Emma standing there, a covered plate in her hands, Jake hovering behind her with an apologetic expression. We brought you spaghetti, Emma announced, holding up the plate. Daddy makes the best sauce, and nobody should have to eat alone when they're stuck somewhere new. Sarah blinked, momentarily speechless. That's very thoughtful. Jake shrugged. Emma insisted. Sorry to disturb you. No, it's fine. I was just... Sarah glanced back at her laptop, displaying spreadsheets and market projections, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. Would you like to come in? Emma beamed, stepping past Sarah without hesitation. Jake followed more cautiously, looking out of place in the small room with his tall frame and broad shoulders. Emma set the plate on the small table by the window, carefully removing the foil cover to reveal a generous portion of spaghetti with meat sauce and a slice of garlic bread. The aroma filled the room, making Sarah's stomach growl audibly. See, Daddy, I told you she was hungry. Jake smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Emma has a sixth sense about these things. Sarah sat at the table, suddenly aware that she couldn't remember when she'd last eaten. Breakfast, maybe. A protein bar in the car. Thank you, she said, genuinely touched by the gesture. This looks delicious. Emma climbed onto the second chair, watching with unabashed interest as Sarah took her first bite. Do you like it? Daddy says the secret is adding a little bit of cinnamon. Emma, Jake warned, let Ms. Wellington eat in peace. It's really good. Sarah assured them, both surprised to find she meant it. The sauce was rich and flavorful, nothing like the bland, overpriced restaurant meals she usually consumed during business dinners. What do you do in Chicago? Emma asked, ignoring her father's attempt to shush her. Are you a lawyer? You look like a lawyer with your fancy suit. Sarah smiled despite herself. I run a company, a food company actually. Like a restaurant? No, we make food products that are sold in grocery stores. Snacks, ready meals, that sort of thing. Emma's eyes widened. Do you make cookies? Among other things, yes. That's the best job ever, Emma declared. Better than Daddy's job fixing cars, even though that's pretty good too. Jake leaned against the wall, watching the exchange with a mixture of amusement and embarrassment. Sorry about the interrogation. Emma believes everyone's life story is open for discussion. It's fine, Sarah said, surprised to realize she didn't mind the child's questions. When was the last time anyone had shown genuine interest in her beyond what she could do for them professionally? Do you have kids? Emma continued, leaning forward on her elbows. The question caught Sarah off guard. No, I don't. Why not, Emma? Jake's voice held a note of warning. That's personal. It's okay, Sarah assured him, though the question had touched a nerve. I've been focused on my career, building my company. There hasn't been time for a family. Emma considered this with remarkable seriousness for a 5-year-old. But don't you get lonely? The directness of the question struck Sarah like a physical blow. Of course she got lonely, sitting in her penthouse apartment, overlooking a city of millions, eating takeout alone, falling asleep to the glow of her laptop. But she'd never admitted it, not even to herself. Sometimes, she conceded the admission surprising her as much as it seemed to surprise Jake, whose expression softened. Emma nodded sagely. Daddy gets lonely too, but he doesn't say it. I can tell because he talks to Mama's picture when he thinks I'm asleep. Emma, Jake's voice was gentle but firm. That's enough questions for tonight. Ms. Wellington has work to do, and you have school tomorrow. Emma sighed dramatically but slid off the chair. Will you still be here tomorrow, Miss Sarah? I'm hoping to get back to Chicago as soon as possible. Oh, Emma's disappointment was palpable. But you'll come say goodbye before you go, right? Sarah found herself nodding. Of course, and After they left, Sarah returned to her spreadsheets, but her focus had been shattered. Emma's innocent questions had cracked open a door she'd kept firmly shut for years. Was she lonely, Em? Had she sacrificed personal connections for professional success? Absolutely. Had it been worth it? For the first time, Sarah Wellington wasn't sure of the answer. Morning arrived with sun instead of rain, the storm having passed during the night. Sarah woke to her phone buzzing with a flood of messages, now that reception had improved. Melissa had sent 12 increasingly urgent texts, the most recent reading, Henderson called emergency board meeting for 2 p.m. today. Critical, you return. Sarah dressed quickly in the only casual outfit she'd packed, dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, and headed to the diner across the street. Inside, the small restaurant was already busy with locals starting their day. Conversations hushed briefly as she entered, curious eyes taking in the stranger in their midst, before resuming with the added spice of speculation. She took a seat at the counter where a middle-aged waitress with a name tag reading Maggie approached with a coffee pot. You must be the Mercedes lady, Maggie said, pouring coffee without asking. Word travels fast in Millbrook. Apparently, Sarah replied, accepting the mug gratefully. I'm Sarah Wellington. Maggie Chen, this is my place. She set down a menu. Jake said he's taking you to Grantsville this morning for a rental. Best get some breakfast in you first. Our special today is blueberry pancakes. Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the door jingled, and Jake entered with Emma in tow. The little girl spotted Sarah immediately and dashed over her backpack, bouncing against her small frame. Ms. Sarah, you're still here. Emma climbed onto the stool next to her, while Jake followed more sedately. As promised, Sarah said, surprised by her own smile. Good morning, Jake. Morning, he replied, looking more rested than he had the previous night. He'd traded his work clothes for a clean flannel shirt and jeans that, while not designer, fit him well. Sleep okay? Well enough. I appreciate you driving me to Grantsville. Jake ordered coffee and breakfast for himself and Emma, the easy familiarity with which Maggie greeted them, speaking of a long-standing routine. Sarah noticed how several other patrons called out greetings to them, Jake responding with friendly nods and Emma waving enthusiastically. Everybody knows everybody here, Sarah observed. Jake shrugged. It's the blessing and curse of small towns. No anonymity, but also no strangers. When Emma had pneumonia last winter, we came home from the hospital to find our driveway shoveled and our fridge full of casseroles. That sounds nice, Sarah said, trying to imagine her Chicago neighbors doing anything similar. Most days she couldn't have picked them out of a lineup. Emma, who had been arranging sugar packets into an elaborate pattern, looked up. Daddy, can Ms. Sarah see the garage before we take her to get a new car? Jake looked apologetic. I'm sure Ms. Wellington wants to get back to Chicago as soon as possible, Em. But Sarah found herself hesitating. The board meeting wasn't until 2 p.m. and Grantsville was only 40 minutes away, according to Jake. Actually, I'd like to see how my car is coming along. Emma beamed triumphantly. After breakfast, they walked back to Morrison's Auto Repair, where Sarah's Mercedes sat in the Central Bay hood, open like a patient undergoing surgery. In daylight, the garage revealed more character than she'd noticed the previous night. The tools were well-worn but meticulously organized, and despite the building's age, everything was clean and orderly. A small desk in the corner held a computer that had to be at least 10 years old, and beside it a wall covered with children's drawings, all signed with Emma's careful handwriting. Jake moved to the Mercedes, his posture changing subtly as he focused on the engine. His hands moved with confident precision, identifying problems and solutions with an expertise that Sarah, despite her ignorance of automotive mechanics, could recognize as mastery. Your radiator's definitely cracked, he explained, pointing to the damage. And the water pump needs replacing. I've ordered the parts, but they won't arrive until tomorrow at the earliest. Sarah nodded, watching him work. There was something compelling about someone who knew exactly what they were doing, regardless of the field. In her corporate world, she was surrounded by people trying to hide their limitations. Jake seemed to have nothing to prove. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "Working on cars since I was 12. My dad owned this place before me. Started me changing oil, checking tire pressure. Said if I was going to inherit the business someday, I'd better understand it from the ground up." "Your father taught you the business then?" Something in her tone made Jake glance up. "Yours too." Sarah nodded, surprised by the unexpected connection. "Wellington Foods was a small family bakery when my father took it over from his father. He built it into a regional company before I took the reins. And now we're national with aspirations to go international. The board meeting I'm missing is about a potential expansion into Asian markets." Jake whistled softly. Quite a jump from a family bakery. "That's business. Adapt or die. Is that what your father believed?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "He had more traditional values. He always said we should remember where we came from." She shook her head, dismissing the memory. "But nostalgia doesn't drive growth." Jake was quiet for a moment, focusing on the engine. "My dad used to say something similar. Never get so big you forget what you're really selling." "And what was that?" "Trust," Jake replied simply. "People bring their cars to us because they trust us to be honest about what needs fixing and what doesn't. That's worth more than any upsell." Emma, who had been quietly coloring at her small table in the corner, piped up. "Daddy fixes Mrs. Rodriguez's car for free sometimes because she needs it to get to her job at the hospital." Jake shot his daughter a look that was half proud, half exasperated. "Emma thinks everyone needs to know everyone else's business." Sarah looked between them, struck by the contrast to her own world, where information was currency hoarded and strategically deployed. "That's a generous policy." "It's not policy, it's just being human," Jake said, closing the Mercedes' hood. "Mrs. Rodriguez needs her job to support her son. Her son needs the special education program at the county school. The school needs Mrs. Rodriguez to volunteer at their fundraisers. It all connects." The simple truth of his statement resonated uncomfortably with Sarah. When had she last considered the human element in her business decisions? Closures, layoffs, relocations, all were numbers on spreadsheets to her, not names and faces and interconnected lives. "Ready to head to Grantsville?" Jake asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Yes, thank you. I need to be back in Chicago by early afternoon." Emma looked up from her coloring. "Can I come too, Daddy? Please, I want to show Ms. Sarah my special place on the way." Jake hesitated, glancing at Sarah. "It would only add a few minutes to the drive. There's an old Wellington Foods bakery on the road to Grantsville. Emma likes the mural on the side of the building." Sarah froze. "Did you say Wellington Foods bakery?" "Yeah, it's been closed for years now, but the building's still there. Pretty place brick with this old-fashioned sign." Sarah's heart raced. "That was my grandfather's original bakery. I didn't realize it was near here." Emma jumped up, excitement written across her face. "It's your bakery, the one with the pretty cakes painted on the wall." "It was my family's, yes. I haven't seen it since I was a child." "Then you have to come see it," Emma declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "It's the best building in the whole town, even if it's empty now." Jake studied Sarah's face. "We don't have to if it brings up difficult memories." "No," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness of her response. "I'd like to see it." 20 minutes later, Jake's truck turned onto a tree-lined street on the outskirts of Millbrook. The neighborhood had seen better days. Several storefronts were boarded up, and for sale signs dotted the landscape. But there was a certain faded charm to the brick buildings and wide sidewalks. "There it is," Emma pointed excitedly from her car seat. The Wellington family bakery stood at the corner, its red brick facade weathered but intact. The large display windows were dusty and empty, but the hand-painted sign above the door remained remarkably preserved. "Wellington Family Bakery, Estange 1925, in an elegant gold lettering. On the side wall, a faded mural depicted an array of baked goods, cakes, pies, and breads, with the slogan, "Made with love, served with pride." Jake parked the truck, and Emma immediately unbuckled herself, bouncing with impatience. "Can we go closer? Please." Sarah nodded, unable to speak, past the unexpected lump in her throat. She followed Emma to the building, Jake trailing behind at a respectful distance. The front door was locked, but Sarah peered through the grimy windows into the empty space beyond. The display cases were long gone, but she could still see the outlines on the floor where they had stood. The counter where her grandfather had served customers, the corner where her father had installed their first espresso machine in the 1980s, the back wall that had held shelves of fresh bread every morning. "My father worked the counter after school," she said softly. "He met my mother here. She came in every day for a cinnamon roll and coffee." Emma pressed her face to the glass. "Did you work here too?" "When I was young, yes. My job was to arrange the cookies in the display case." Sarah smiled at the memory. "I always ate the broken ones." "Smart," Emu approved. Jake had wandered to the side of the building examining something. "Sarah," he called, "you might want to see this." She joined him at a small brass plaque mounted beside the side entrance. The tarnished metal read, "In memory of James Wellington, who turned flour and sugar into happiness for 3 generations of Millbrook families." "My father," Sarah whispered, touching the plaque. "I had no idea this was here." "The town installed it when the bakery closed," Jake explained. "Your family's business meant a lot to Millbrook." "I never knew. When the corporate headquarters moved to Chicago, this location became unprofitable. The board—" She stopped, suddenly realizing. It was just a line item in a budget report. "Closure of unprofitable legacy location." I signed off on it without even realizing which location it was. Jake was quiet for a moment, watching her process this revelation. "Sometimes in business, we lose sight of what matters most," he said finally, his voice gentle rather than judgmental. Emma, oblivious to the emotional moment, had discovered a loose brick in the wall. "Look what I found." She wiggled it free, revealing a small cavity behind it. "It's like a secret hiding place." Sarah knelt beside her, curiosity temporarily displacing her regret. "What's in there?" Emma reached in carefully and withdrew a metal tin, its surface rusted with age. She handed it to Sarah with the solemnity of presenting a sacred artifact. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the tin. Inside lay a handwritten recipe book, its pages yellowed but intact, in a small envelope addressed simply, "To my Sarah." "It's for you," Emma exclaimed. "How did they know you would come?" Sarah recognized her father's handwriting immediately. The letter was dated just months before his death, when the bakery had been slated for closure. With unsteady hands, she opened the envelope and read, "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you've found your way back to where it all began. I've hidden this tin in the hopes that someday when you're ready, you'll remember what Wellington Foods was meant to be, not just a company, but a connection. These recipes aren't just instructions for bread and pastries. They're our family's legacy of bringing people together. Success without purpose is just noise, Sarah. I fear I've taught you to hear only the noise and miss the music. When you're ready to listen again, start with Grandma Mary's cinnamon rolls on page 12. They changed my life when they brought your mother to me, and perhaps they'll change yours too. With endless love and faith in you, Dad." Sarah didn't realize she was crying until a tear splashed onto the paper. The letter was everything her father had tried to tell her in those final months. Everything she'd been too busy building an empire to hear. Jake placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" She nodded, carefully returning the letter to the envelope. "My father left this for me. Somehow he knew I'd find my way back here someday." Emma, with a child's instinct for emotional moments, slipped her small hand into Sarah's. "See, your daddy was magic just like mine. They know things." Sarah looked up at Jake, suddenly seeing him not just as a small-town mechanic, but as a man who understood what her father had been trying to teach her, that business was about people, not just profits. "I think," she said slowly, "that breaking down in Millbrook might not have been the disaster I thought it was." Jake smiled, the expression warming his entire face. "My dad used to say there are no coincidences, only opportunities wearing disguises." As they stood there in the shadow of her family's legacy, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a realignment of priorities that had been building since her car had first sputtered to a stop outside Millbrook. The board meeting suddenly seemed less urgent, the corporate politics less consequential. "Jake," she said, making a decision, "would it be possible to delay our trip to Grantsville for a bit? There's something I'd like to do first." "Name it." Sarah held up the recipe book. "I'd like to try making my grandmother's cinnamon rolls. Page 12. Emma clapped her hands in delight. "Can we use your kitchen?" "Daddy, please." Jake's smile deepened, reaching his eyes. "I think that can be arranged." As they walked back to the truck, Sarah clutched the tin to her chest, feeling as though she'd recovered not just family recipes, but a piece of herself she hadn't realized was missing. For the first time in years, the Wellington name felt like more than a corporate logo. It felt like an identity, a history, a purpose. The Mercedes in the board meeting could wait. Sarah Wellington was going home. Jake's kitchen was nothing like the gourmet space in Sarah's Chicago penthouse. The appliances were dated but well-maintained, the countertops laminate rather than marble, and the cabinets showed signs of a recent child's art project gone slightly awry. But as Sarah placed her grandmother's recipe book on the worn wooden table, the space felt more welcoming than any high-end restaurant or corporate dining room she'd frequented in years. "We don't have fancy equipment," Jake apologized, pulling flour and sugar from the pantry. "But the oven works well enough." Emma had already climbed onto a chair, positioning herself at the center of the action. "I'm the best helper," she announced. "Daddy lets me stir." Sarah smiled, opening the recipe book to page 12. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the page, the instructions peppered with personal notes like, "Add extra cinnamon on cold days," and "Let rise longer for special occasions." "I haven't baked since I was a teenager," Sarah admitted, scanning the ingredient list. "This might be a disaster." Well, Jake leaned against the counter, arms crossed casually. "Cooking's like riding a bike. It comes back to you." "I never actually learned to ride a bike," Sarah confessed. Jake and Emma stared at her with identical expressions of disbelief. "Never." Emma's voice was filled with the horror only a child could muster for such a deprivation. Sarah shrugged. "I had piano lessons, language tutors, business classes. There wasn't time for bikes." Jake shook his head. "That settles it. After cinnamon rolls, bike riding lessons. Emma's old training wheels are still in the garage." The absurdity of the image, Sarah Wellington, CEO, wobbling down a suburban street on a child's bicycle, startled a laugh from her. The sound felt foreign, rusty from disuse. For the next hour, the kitchen transformed into a collaborative workspace unlike anything in Sarah's experience. Jake moved with surprising grace for a man his size, gathering ingredients and demonstrating techniques. Emma appointed herself quality control, insisting on tasting every component. And Sarah, to her own surprise, found herself remembering skills she thought long forgotten. The feel of dough under her fingers, the scent of cinnamon and sugar melding together, the patient pleasure of creating something with her hands rather than her business acumen. When the timer finally dinged and Jake pulled the golden brown rolls from the oven, the kitchen filled with a fragrance that transported Sarah instantly to her childhood, Sunday mornings in the bakery, her father's flour-dusted apron, her mother's delighted smile at the first bite. "They look perfect," Jake said, setting the pan on a cooling rack. Emma inhaled dramatically. "They smell like heaven." Sarah touched one, gently feeling the warmth against her fingertips. "My father used to say that cinnamon rolls were magic because they could make anyone smile even on the worst days." "Your dad was right," Jake said, cutting into one and releasing a cloud of fragrant steam. "Some foods go beyond nourishment, their connection." As they sat around the small kitchen table, savoring the still warm rolls and coffee milk, for Emma, Sarah found herself sharing stories about the bakery that she hadn't thought about in years. How her grandfather had continued baking through the Depression, accepting payment in eggs or garden vegetables when customers couldn't afford cash. How her father had expanded the menu to include European pastries after a trip to France. How the bakery had become a community gathering place where local politics were debated, romances kindled, and celebrations marked. "That's what businesses used to be," Jake observed. "Part of the community fabric, not just profit centers." Sarah's phone buzzed, insistently breaking the moment. She glanced at it reluctantly. 15 missed calls from Melissa and a text that simply read, "Urgent. Henderson moving against you. Need response ASAP." Jake noticed her expression change. "Corporate emergency." Sarah sighed, setting the phone down. "My position is under threat. The board meeting I'm missing, one of the members is using my absence to suggest I'm not committed enough." "Are you dumb?" Jake asked, his directness catching her off guard. "Am I what? Committed to the company?" Sarah started to deliver her standard response about growth metrics and shareholder value, then stopped herself. "I'm committed to what the company could be, should be, but somewhere along the way it became about numbers instead of people." Emma, who had been quietly eating her second cinnamon roll, looked up. Like how Daddy says his garage isn't just about fixing cars, it's about helping people get to important places. Jake smiled softly at his daughter. Exactly like that smart girl. Sarah studied them both, this man and child who seemed to understand instinctively what had taken her years of corporate success to forget. I should probably get back to Chicago, she said reluctantly. There's a lot at stake. There always is, Jake agreed, but sometimes we need to decide what's actually worth fighting for. Their eyes met across the table and Sarah felt something shift between them, a recognition, a possibility, a question neither was ready to ask aloud. Emma broke the moment by sliding off her chair. I need to show Ms. Sarah my special rock collection before she goes. It's super important. Jake checked his watch. Tell you what, I've got some calls to make about your car parts. Why don't you take Miss Sarah to the park to see your rocks, and I'll pick you both up in an hour. Then we can head to Grantsville if that's still what you want. Sarah looked at her phone again, then at Emma's hopeful face, then back to Jake. A day ago, the choice would have been automatic business, first always. But now, I'd love to see your rock collection, Emma, she said, putting her phone in her purse. Jake's smile was warm with something that might have been approval. I'll call Melissa for you, he offered. Explain the situation, buy you some time. CEO to administrative assistant, it's a universal language. I've never delegated a board crisis before, Sarah admitted. First time for everything, Jake replied, including bike riding and playing hooky. Sad. The Millbrook Community Park was modest by Chicago standards, a small playground, a baseball diamond, and a meandering path along a creek, but Emma approached it with the proprietary pride of a duchess showing off her estates. This is where I found my first special rock, she announced, leading Sarah to the creek bank. Daddy says it's an igneous rock. That means it came from volcanoes. Sarah knelt beside her, admiring the collection of stones Emma pulled from her pockets. These are impressive. You have quite the eye. The secret is looking where other people don't, Emma confided, handing Sarah a smooth black stone. Most people only look at the pretty ones on top, but the really special ones are hiding. That's surprisingly profound, Sarah said, turning the stone over in her hand. Emma shrugged. Daddy says I'm an old soul. I think that means I'm smart about stuff. They spent the next hour exploring the park, Emma pointing out her favorite climbing tree, the best spot for seeing tadpoles in spring, and the bench where she and Jake fed ducks on Sunday afternoons. Throughout it all, she chattered about school, her friends, and her absent mother with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. Mama left because she didn't like small towns, Emma explained as they sat on a swing set. She wanted fancy restaurants and big buildings like in the movies. Daddy says sometimes people just need different things to be happy. Sarah pushed gently with her feet, setting her swing in motion. That's a mature way to look at it. Do you like big cities better than small towns too? Emma asked, watching Sarah carefully. The question gave Sarah pause. I thought I did. I've always associated big cities with opportunity, with success. But are they better for being happy? Again, the child's directness cut through pretense. I don't know, Sarah admitted. I haven't really thought about what makes me happy in a long time. Emma kicked her legs, propelling her swing higher. You should think about it. Daddy says happiness isn't an accident, it's a choice you make every day. Sarah watched the little girl soaring on her swing, face tilted to the sun, and felt a twinge of something like envy for such uncomplicated joy. When had she last done anything simply because it made her happy? Their contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly woman who approached with a warm smile. Emma Morrison, is that a new friend you have got there? Emma jumped from her swing with practiced ease. Mrs. Patterson, this is Ms. Sarah. Her car broke down and Daddy's fixing it, but we made cinnamon rolls first. Sarah stood extending her hand. Sarah Wellington, it's nice to meet you. Margaret Patterson, the woman replied, her handshake surprisingly firm. I taught kindergarten here for 40 years, including this little whirlwind and her father before her. You taught Jake as well, Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled. Oh my, yes. He was a serious child, always taking care of others even then. When his father was ill, Jake would come to school early to help me set up the classroom so I wouldn't have to bend with my bad hip. Some people are just born with giving hearts. Something in Sarah's expression must have revealed her interest because Mrs. Patterson continued, with the delighted air of someone who rarely gets to share treasured stories. The Morrisons have been fixtures in Millbrook for generations. Jake's grandfather started the auto shop after World War II. His father expanded it, and Jake's kept it going despite everything. Despite what? Sarah asked. Mrs. Patterson's expression sobered. The town's been struggling since the factory closures. When the Wellington Foods plant shut down 5 years ago, it hit us especially hard. 200 jobs lost overnight. Jake's garage would probably do better in a bigger town, but he stays because people here need him. Sarah felt a chill despite the afternoon warmth. Wellington Foods had a plant here in Millbrook. Oh yes, for decades. Made all their baked goods for the Midwest region. Your name's Wellington too. Any relation? Before Sarah could respond, Emma tugged at her hand. Look, Daddy's here. Jake's truck pulled up to the curb and he waved through the window. Mrs. Patterson smiled at the sight. Jake's a good man, she said quietly to Sarah. The best Millbrook has. Whatever's going on between you two, keep that in mind. He's fixing my car, Sarah stammered. Caught off guard, Mrs. Patterson patted her arm. Of course, dear, and I'm just an old woman who's seen too much to miss the way he looks at you. As the elderly teacher walked away, Sarah stood frozen, processing both the revelation about her company's history in Millbrook and the implication about Jake's interest in her. Before she could untangle either thought, Emma was pulling her toward the truck. Jake greeted them with news. Parts for your Mercedes will be here tomorrow morning. I've arranged for a loaner car if you still want to head back to Chicago today. Sarah hesitated, the weight of her corporate responsibilities warring with a new unfamiliar reluctance to leave. I should go back. The board meeting, already handled, Jake interrupted. I spoke with Melissa. She's rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon and sent Henderson a legal notice about improper procedure for emergency meetings. Apparently, you need 24 hours notice unless it's a genuine crisis and your absence doesn't qualify. Sarah stared at him. You did that? How? Jake shrugged. Melissa and I had a good talk. Turns out we both want what's best for you, just from different angles. And what do you think is best for me? The question emerged before Sarah could consider its implications. Jake held her gaze. I think you need time to remember who Sarah Wellington is beyond the CEO title. And I think Millbrook might be the perfect place for that. Emma, who had been following the conversation with interest, nodded enthusiastically. You should stay. We can have a sleepover, and I can show you my room, and we can make breakfast tomorrow. Sarah looked between them, Jake's steady, undemanding presence, and Emma's exuberant hope, and made a decision that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. I'd like that, she said softly. If you're sure I wouldn't be imposing. Jake's smile was answer enough. It's not much, Jake said as he opened the door to his home. The modest two-story house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees just beginning to show autumn colors. A porch swing hung from the ceiling of the small front porch, and flower beds, though past their prime for the season, showed evidence of careful tending. Inside the living room was comfortable rather than stylish, a well-worn couch facing a modest television, bookshelves filled with an eclectic mix of titles, and walls adorned with Emma's artwork and family photographs. Nothing matched perfectly, but everything felt intentional, chosen for meaning rather than appearance. It's lovely, Sarah said, meaning it. After the sterile perfection of her penthouse, the lived-in warmth of Jake's home felt refreshingly authentic. Emma immediately took charge, giving Sarah a tour that included detailed explanations of every stuffed animal in her collection and the backstory of each drawing on the refrigerator. Jake followed behind, adding occasional commentary and apologizing for clutter that Sarah barely noticed. And this is where you'll sleep, Emma announced, pushing open a door to reveal a small guest room. A double bed with a patchwork quilt dominated the space, accompanied by a simple dresser and nightstand. Grandma Morrison made the quilt before she went to heaven. Daddy says it's like getting a hug all night long. Jake cleared his throat. Bathrooms across the hall, towels in the cabinet. Let me know if you need anything else. The domesticity of the moment struck Sarah, suddenly standing in this family home, being offered towels and quilts, and a place to belong, even temporarily. In Chicago, her interactions were transactions. Here they were connections. Thank you, she said, the words encompassing more than just the room. For all of this, Jake seemed to understand what she wasn't saying. Sometimes we all need a soft place to land, Sarah, even CEOs. That evening unfolded with the gentle rhythm of family life, Jake grilling chicken on the back patio, while Emma set the table and Sarah, at her own insistence, prepared a salad. They ate on the back deck, watching fireflies emerge as twilight descended, and Sarah found herself sharing more about her life in Chicago than she'd revealed to anyone in years. The penthouse has a fantastic view, she explained, but sometimes I feel like I'm watching life instead of living it. 42 floors up, everyone looks like ants. Do you have friends there? Emma asked, picking through her salad for cucumber pieces. I have colleagues, business associates, a network. Sarah paused, realizing how empty the word sounded. Not really friends, no. That's sad, Emma said with characteristic bluntness. Everyone needs friends. Right, Daddy? Jake nodded, his eyes on Sarah. Community matters. People who know the real you, not just what you can do for them. The real me, Sarah repeated softly. I'm not sure I remember who that is anymore. After dinner, as Jake washed dishes and Emma got ready for bed, Sarah stepped outside onto the back deck. The night was clear, stars visible in a way they never were in Chicago's light-polluted sky. She breathed deeply, letting the quiet settle around her, and tried to remember the last time she'd simply stood still, without agenda or purpose beyond the moment itself. The door opened behind her and Jake stepped out, offering a mug of tea. Emma's requesting that you read her bedtime story. Apparently, I don't do the voices right. Sarah accepted the mug with a smile. I'm not sure I'll be any better. You'll be different. Sometimes that's all kids want to change in perspective. As they stood side by side in the comfortable silence, Sarah found herself wanting to understand this man, who seemed so content with a life she would have considered limiting just days ago. Jake, she began carefully. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Wellington Foods had a plant here in Millbrook. She felt him tense slightly. It did, closed about 5 years ago. Were you affected by the closure? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Everyone in Millbrook was affected. 200 jobs gone, just like that. The town still hasn't recovered. I'm sorry, Sarah said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. I didn't know. Didn't know or didn't care to know. The question wasn't accusatory, just direct. Sarah flinched anyway. Corporate decisions are complex. There are factors. Profit margins, market efficiencies, shareholder value. Jake recited the terms with weary familiarity. I've heard it all before, Sarah. When the announcement came, they sent some VP with a PowerPoint presentation full of charts in corporate speak. But none of it mattered to the families who had to move away or the local businesses that closed because their customers couldn't afford them anymore. The weight of his words settled heavily on Sarah. My father would have hated what happened to this town, to our bakery. Your father, Jake said slowly, turning to face her. James Wellington. Yes, he died 5 years ago, cancer. Something shifted in Jake's expression. James Wellington came to Millbrook once, about 7 years ago. He visited the plant, talked with the workers, not just the management, but the people on the line. He knew their names. Sarah felt a bittersweet pride. That sounded like her father, the man who had built Wellington Foods on relationships, not just transactions. After he died, she said quietly, things changed. The board pushed for aggressive expansion, cost-cutting. I went along with it because that's what CEOs do. They grow companies, increase value. At what cost? Jake asked, but his tone was thoughtful rather than confrontational. Sarah had no answer. Emma's voice called from inside, Miss Sarah, I'm ready for my story. Jake's expression softened. Duty calls. Princess Jellybean requires her literary entertainment. Sarah followed him inside, grateful for the interruption, yet unsettled by the conversation. As she read to Emma a story about a brave little fish who ventures beyond his reef to discover a wider ocean, she couldn't help seeing parallels to her own situation. Had she been living in a self-imposed reef, convinced it was the entire ocean? Later, as she prepared for bed in the guest room, Sarah checked her phone one last time. Among the business emails and texts from Melissa was a notification that surprised her, a calendar reminder for tomorrow's date, Dad's birthday. She'd forgotten. In the corporate chaos and travel disruption, she'd completely forgotten her own father's birthday. With trembling fingers, she opened the photo album on her phone and found the last picture taken of them together at a charity gala, both in formal wear, smiling for the camera. It was a good photo, but somehow it didn't capture the father she remembered from childhood, the man who taught her to bake, who believed business was about serving people who valued connection over conquest. Sarah looked around the guest room at the handmade quilt and the family photos on the wall and felt something crack open inside her, a vault of emotions she'd sealed shut when her father died and she took over the company. Grief, regret, uncertainty all flooded through the breach. For the first time in 5 years, Sarah Wellington cried for the father she'd lost and the legacy she feared she was betraying. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee and the sound of Emma's laughter drifting up the stairs. Sarah dressed in the same casual clothes from yesterday, noting with irony that her suitcase full of designer suits and dresses remained untouched at the Millbrook Inn. Downstairs, she found Jake at the stove making pancakes while Emma arranged fruit into smiley faces on plates. "Good morning," Jake greeted her. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months," Sarah admitted, accepting the coffee mug he offered. Emma bounded over. "I made your plate special. See, the strawberries are the smile and the blueberries are the eyes." "It's a work of art," Sarah assured her, taking a seat at the table. As they ate breakfast, Jake outlined the day's plan. "Your car parts should arrive by noon. I figure we can get the Mercedes back on the road by late afternoon in time for you to make it back to Chicago for your rescheduled board meeting." Sarah nodded, surprised by her reluctance at the thought of leaving. "I should check in with Melissa, make sure everything's prepared." "Use the landline in my office," Jake suggested. "Cell reception can still be spotty." Jake's office turned out to be a small room off the living room containing a desk filing cabinet and bookshelves filled with automotive manuals and business references. Family photos lined the walls, including several of a younger Jake with an older man who shared his eyes and jawline his father Sarah guessed. As she dialed Melissa's number, Sarah noticed a framed newspaper article on the desk. The headline read, "Local Engineer Saves Wellington Foods Production Line." The accompanying photo showed a younger Jake shaking hands with a plant manager. "Sarah, thank God," Melissa answered on the first ring. "Where have you been?" "The board is in chaos. Henderson's been making calls to major shareholders, and the Yamamoto deal is hanging by a thread." "I'm handling it, Melissa. What's the status of the emergency board meeting?" "Postponed until 4 p.m. today as requested. But Sarah Henderson's gathering support. He's claiming your absence proves his point about your commitment issues." Sarah's eyes remained fixed on the newspaper article. "Melissa, did you know Wellington Foods had a plant in Millbrook, Illinois?" "The town you're stranded in, I think, so one of the facilities we closed a few years ago." "Why, I need you to pull all the files on that closure. Financial projections, impact studies, everything." "Sarah, with all due respect, we have bigger issues right now than a plant closure from 5 years ago." "Just do it, please." "And Melissa, look into a man named Jake Morrison. He worked at the plant as an engineer." There was a pause on the line. "Is he the mechanic fixing your car?" "Yes." "Sarah," Melissa's voice held a warning. "Whatever's happening there, don't lose focus. Henderson is out for blood." "I'm more focused than I've been in years," Sarah replied with a certainty that surprised her. "Have those files ready when I arrive." As she hung up, Sarah studied the article more closely. According to the text, Jake had redesigned a critical component of the production line, saving the company nearly $1 million in potential downtime. The date was 8 years ago, before the plant closure, before her father's death. Jake Morrison wasn't just a small-town mechanic. He'd been part of Wellington Foods. Sarah stepped back into the kitchen where Jake was helping Emma pack her school lunch. "You worked for Wellington Foods, Vasis," she said without preamble, "as an engineer." Jake paused, peanut butter knife suspended midair. "I did, for about 5 years. Why didn't you tell me? You didn't ask." He resumed making the sandwich. "Besides, it didn't seem relevant to fixing your car." "Of course it's relevant," Sarah insisted. "My company closed the plant you worked at, cost you your job, damaged your town's economy, and you've spent the last 2 days helping me without a word about any of it." Jake finished the sandwich and placed it in Emma's lunchbox before responding. "What would have been the point? Blaming you for corporate decisions made 5 years ago? You were just doing your job, same as I'm doing mine now." His reasonable tone only intensified Sarah's discomfort. "So this whole time, the garage, the cinnamon rolls, letting me stay in your home, was what, charity for the corporate villain?" Emma looked between them, her small face creasing with concern. "Are you fighting?" "Oh, no, sweetheart," Jake assured her. Ms. Sarah and I are just having a grown-up discussion. Why don't you go brush your teeth before school? After Emma left, Jake turned to Sarah. I didn't tell you because it doesn't define who I am now, and I didn't want it to define how you saw me. I'm not bitter about Wellington Foods. Disappointed, yes. The closure was handled poorly with no regard for the community. But I built a new life, a good life. As a mechanic when you were trained as an engineer. As a father, a neighbor, a man who makes an honest living doing work that matters. Jake corrected. The title on my paycheck doesn't determine my worth, Sarah. The gentle rebuke landed with precision. How many times had Sarah introduced herself as CEO of Wellington Foods, rather than simply as herself? I'm sorry, she said finally. You're right. I feel like there's this whole history connecting us that I didn't know about. Jake's expression softened. Maybe that's what your car breaking down was really about. Sometimes the universe has to force us to stop before we can see what's right in front of us. Before Sarah could respond, Emma bounded back into the room. All ready for school, Ms. Sarah, will you still be here when I get home? The question hung in the air, weighted with more significance than a 5-year-old could understand. Sarah looked at Jake, then back to Emma's hopeful face. I have a very important meeting in Chicago this afternoon, she said carefully. But I promise I'll say goodbye before I leave. Emma's smile dimmed slightly, but she nodded. Okay, but you have to pinky swear. Sarah solemnly linked her little finger with Emma's. Pinky swear. After Jake left to take Emma to school, promising to return quickly to start work on the Mercedes, Sarah found herself alone in the Morrison home. The silence felt different from the silence of her penthouse, warmer somehow, alive with the echoes of family life, rather than the sterile emptiness of corporate success. She wandered through the rooms, seeing details she'd missed the night before: a bookshelf filled with engineering texts alongside children's stories, Jake's college diploma hanging modestly in the hallway, mechanical engineering, summa cum laude, a calendar on the refrigerator marked with Emma's doctor appointments and school events. In the living room, a photo album lay on the coffee table. Sarah hesitated, then sat down and opened it. The first pages showed a younger Jake with a pretty woman with strawberry blonde hair, Emma's mother, she presumed. They looked happy in the early photos, but as she turned the pages, the woman's smile became increasingly forced, her eyes distant even when she was physically present. The photos of Emma's early years showed Jake as a devoted father holding his newborn daughter, feeding her in a high chair, pushing her on a swing. The mother appeared in fewer and fewer images until she disappeared entirely around what must have been Emma's second birthday. The final pages documented the life Jake and Emma had built together. Holiday celebrations, beach trips, ordinary moments made special through the lens of love. In every photo, Jake looked at his daughter with a pride and tenderness that made Sarah's chest ache with an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. It was longing, she realized. Longing for that kind of unconditional love, that sense of belonging. The front door opened and Jake returned, bringing with him the scent of autumn air and motor oil. Good news, he announced. Parts just arrived early. I can have your car ready by... He stopped, noticing the album in her hands. Sorry, I should have put that away. No, I'm the one who should apologize for snooping, Sarah said, closing the album. You and Emma have built a beautiful life together. Jake sat beside her, leaving a careful distance between them. Not the life I planned, but yes, it's good. After Linda left, I had to redefine what success meant to me. Turns out it had nothing to do with job titles or bank accounts. I wish I had your clarity, Sarah admitted. All my life, I've equated success with professional achievement. More responsibility, bigger deals, larger profits. And has it made you happy? The question hung between them, simple yet profound. It made me successful, Sarah hedged. That's not what I asked. Sarah looked down at the photo album, at the images of a life so different from her own. No, she said finally, I don't think I've been happy for a very long time. Jake was quiet for a moment. What would make you happy, Sarah, if there were no expectations, no board of directors, no family legacy to uphold? What would you choose? The question was so unexpected, so fundamental, that Sarah found herself without a rehearsed answer. I don't know, she said honestly. But being here in Millbrook, making cinnamon rolls and reading bedtime stories, it's the most peace I've felt since my father died. Jake's eyes held hers, and in them she saw understanding rather than judgment. Maybe that's your starting point then. The moment stretched between them, intimate and charged with possibility. Sarah felt herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a connection that transcended their different worlds. The shrill ring of the landline phone shattered the moment. Jake answered, his expression shifting as he listened. When? How high? Yes, I'll be right there. He hung up, face grim. I have to go. That was Emma's school. She's having a medical episode, her temperature spiking. Sarah stood immediately. What can I do? Nothing. Stay here. I'll handle it. Jake grabbed his keys, movements tense with barely controlled fear. Jake, let me help, please. He paused at the door, conflict clear on his face. It's her condition. Sometimes she gets these fevers that spike dangerously high. She needs her medication and possibly the hospital in Grantsville if it doesn't work quickly. I'm coming with you, Sarah said, grabbing her purse. It wasn't a request. Jake looked like he might argue, then nodded curtly. Let's go. The drive to Emma's school passed in tense silence, Jake's knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sarah wanted to ask questions, but sensed his need to focus, to channel his fear into action rather than conversation. At the school, they were directed to the nurse's office, where they found Emma lying on a cot, her normally vibrant face flushed with fever, eyes glassy. Daddy? She whispered when she saw Jake. Then noticing Sarah, Miss Sarah came too. Of course I did, Sarah said, moving to her side while Jake conferred urgently with the school nurse. Emma's small hand felt burning hot in hers. I don't feel good. I know, sweetheart. Your dad's going to make it better. Jake returned with medication and a cup of water, helping Emma sit up to take it. This will help Princess, just like last time, remember? Emma nodded weakly, swallowing the pills. Am I going to the hospital again? We'll see how the medicine works first. Jake stroked her hair back from her forehead. Miss Sarah's going to sit with you while I talk to the nurse, okay? As Jake stepped away, Sarah held Emma's hand, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. You're very brave, Emma. I have to be brave a lot, Emma confided, her voice small. The doctors say I have special blood that sometimes gets confused and fights itself instead of just the germs. Autoimmune disorder, the nurse explained quietly, having approached without Sarah noticing. Emma has juvenile idiopathic arthritis with systemic features. The fevers can come on suddenly and spike dangerously high. Sarah looked at the little girl with new understanding. That sounds very serious. It can be, the nurse agreed. Emma's on a treatment plan, but the medication is challenging to maintain. The careful phrasing and the nurse's significant look communicated what wasn't being said aloud: expensive. Prohibitively expensive for a single father running a small-town garage. Jake returned, checking Emma's temperature with a practiced hand. Still too high. We need to get her to Dr. Martinez. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Martinez, Millbrook's only physician, examined Emma in his small clinic, while Jake paced the waiting room, tension radiating from every line of his body. Sarah sat quietly, feeling simultaneously intrusive and essential, an outsider witnessing a deeply personal family crisis, yet somehow included in it. When Dr. Martinez finally emerged, his expression was cautiously optimistic. The fever's responding to the medication. I don't think we need to transfer her to Grantsville today, but I want to monitor her for a few more hours. Jake's relief was palpable. Thank you, doctor. Jake, Dr. Martinez continued, his voice lowering. We need to discuss her prescription. The last one was only a partial fill because of them. I know, Jake interrupted with a quick glance at Sarah. I'll figure it out. Dr. Martinez nodded, his expression sympathetic. You can go in and see her now. She's asking for both of you. Both of you? The phrase caught Sarah by surprise. She'd assumed Emma would want only her father at a time like this. Emma was sitting up in the examination room, looking pale but significantly improved. Her face brightened when she saw them. Daddy, Ms. Sarah, Dr. Martinez says I don't have to go to the big hospital. Jake went immediately to her side, enveloping her in a gentle hug. That's great news, Princess. You scared me. Sorry, Emma said, her small face solemn. My silly blood got confused again. It's not your fault, Jake assured her. Never your fault. Sarah hung back, uncertain of her place in this intimate family moment, until Emma extended her hand. Miss Sarah, you kept your promise. You didn't leave without saying goodbye. The simple observation nearly undid Sarah completely. I always keep my promises to important people. Otter Martinez returned with discharge instructions and a prescription. Rest for the remainder of the day. No school tomorrow. And Jake, remember what we discussed about the medication schedule. Jake nodded, his expression guarded. I'll handle it. As they left the clinic, Emma between them holding both their hands, Sarah made a decision. Jake, I'd like to cancel my car service to Chicago. The board meeting can happen without me. Jake looked at her, surprise evident. Sarah, your job will still be there tomorrow, she finished. Emma needs rest, and you shouldn't have to worry about getting my car fixed today on top of everything else. You don't have to do this. I know, Sarah said simply. I want to. Back at Jake's house, they settled Emma on the living room couch with blankets, juice, and her favorite stuffed animals. The crisis had clearly exhausted her, and she fell asleep almost immediately, one hand still clutching the teddy bear Sarah had helped position under her arm. Jake motioned Sarah to follow him to the kitchen, where he began making coffee with the mechanical movements of someone operating on autopilot. Thank you, he said finally, for being there today, for staying. Of course, Shaitan. Sarah hesitated, then asked the question that had been pressing on her since the clinic. Jake, Emma's medication, is there a problem with it? His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. Nothing I can't handle. That's not what I asked. Jake sighed, finally facing her. Her treatment is expensive. Insurance covers part of it, but the copays and deductibles are challenging. Sometimes I have to space out the refills to make it work financially. The implication horrified Sarah. You're rationing her medication because of Karena. I'm managing her medication according to our resources. Jake corrected, a flash of pride in his voice. Mama never goes without what she absolutely needs. But she could be getting more consistent treatment. Jake's silence was answer enough. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a realignment of priorities so fundamental it left her breathless. The board meeting, Henderson's power play, even the Yamamoto deal, all of it seemed suddenly trivial compared to a little girl's health and a father's struggle to provide for her. Let me help, she said impulsively. We don't need charity, Sarah. It's not charity, it's, she searched for the right words, it's community. Isn't that what you've been telling me? That business should be about more than profit, that success should be measured in lives improved, not just dollars earned. Jake studied her face, using my own philosophy against me. That's playing dirty. I learned from the best corporate strategists, Sarah replied with a small smile. But I mean it, Jake. Let me help. Not as CEO of Wellington Foods, but as someone who cares about you and Emma. The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than she'd intended. You care about us, Jake asked quietly. Sarah met his gaze directly. More than I thought possible after just 3 days. It terrifies me, if you want the truth. Why? Because caring about people makes you vulnerable. In business, vulnerability is weakness. Jake moved closer, close enough that Sarah could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. And outside of business, Sarah said softly, I'm learning that vulnerability might be courage in disguise. Jake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gentle touch sent electricity through her entire body. Sarah Wellington, he said, his voice low, you are nothing like I expected. Is that good or bad? Definitely good. His smile reached his eyes, transforming his entire face. Definitely, definitely good. The moment was broken by the sound of Emma calling from the living room. Jake stepped back, the spell between them, temporarily suspended, but not broken. Duty calls, he said. Go, Sarah urged. I'll make fresh juice for when she wakes up completely. As Jake went to tend to his daughter, Sarah found herself smiling despite the day's emotional roller coaster. Something was happening here in Millbrook, something unexpected and potentially life-changing. For the first time in years, Sarah Wellington was following her heart instead of her strategic plan, and the sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. Whatever came next, she knew with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same. The next week unfolded in a rhythm so different from Sarah's usual frenetic pace that it felt almost like stepping into someone else's life. Days that once revolved around back-to-back meetings and urgent conference calls now centered on much simpler markers: Emma's improving health meals shared around Jake's kitchen table and slow progress on Sarah's Mercedes. After that first night of staying with the Morrisons, Sarah had moved her things from the Millbrook Inn to Jake's guest room, a temporary arrangement that somehow began feeling less temporary with each passing day. She had called Melissa to officially take her first vacation in 5 years, delegating the Yamamoto negotiations to her CFO and instructing her assistant to inform the board she was dealing with unforeseen personal matters. Henderson had been furious, of course. His text messages escalated from professional concern to thinly veiled threats, culminating in a voicemail that Sarah deleted halfway through. For the first time in her career, she found herself not caring about corporate politics. The world of Wellington Foods seemed distant and strangely hollow compared to the warm, messy reality of life in Millbrook. On Emma's first day back at school after her illness, Sarah found herself in Jake's garage perched on a stool while he worked on her car. The parts had arrived, but between Emma's medical emergency and an influx of local customers with urgent repairs, the Mercedes had been relegated to a back corner. "You don't need to wait around," Jake said, wiping grease from his hands. "This could take a while." Sarah shrugged, sipping coffee from a chipped mug with "World's Best Dad" painted in a child's hand. "I don't mind. It's interesting watching you work." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Watching someone replace a water pump is interesting. Watching someone do something they're genuinely good at is always interesting." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth as he turned back to the engine. Sarah found her gaze lingering on the strong line of his shoulders, the confident movements of his hands. There was something deeply attractive about his competence, his quiet self-assurance. "So," Jake said after a comfortable silence, "Melissa called this morning while you were in the shower. She seemed surprised when I answered the house phone." Sarah felt a flush creep up her neck. "I imagine she's wondering what her CEO is doing, staying with a small-town mechanic instead of running her multinational company." "And what would you tell her?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. "I'd tell her I'm figuring some things out," Sarah answered finally. "Important things I've been ignoring for too long." Jake straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "And what have you figured it out so far?" Sarah set down her coffee mug, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe normally. "That success and happiness aren't necessarily the same thing. That connections matter more than acquisitions. That I've spent years chasing goals without stopping to ask if they were the right goals." Jake moved closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his soap beneath the motor oil. "Anything else?" Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs. That sometimes the most unexpected detours can lead to exactly where you need to be. His eyes searched hers, and she saw in them the same mixture of hope and uncertainty she felt herself. They had been circling each other for days, growing closer in 100 small ways, yet neither had dared to cross the final line between friendship and something more. The garage phone rang, shattering the moment. Jake answered it, his expression shifting as he listened. "I'll be right there," he said, hanging up. "Mrs. Rodriguez's car broke down halfway to the hospital. Her son has an appointment they can't miss." Sarah nodded, both disappointed and relieved by the interruption. "Go. I'll be here when you get back." Jake grabbed his toolkit, then paused at the door. Sarah. "I know," she said softly. "We'll figure it out. Go help Mrs. Rodriguez." After he left, Sarah wandered through the quiet garage, examining the space that was so integral to Jake's identity. Customer invoices on the desk caught her eye, many of them showing discounted rates or payment plans stretched over months. A wall calendar was marked with community events. Jake had volunteered for School Career Day, Little League coaching, a fundraiser for the local food bank. This was a man whose life was defined by what he gave, not what he took. The contrast with her own career trajectory, built on acquisitions, growth metrics, and market dominance, couldn't have been more stark. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Henderson convened emergency board meeting, claiming abandonment of duties. Need you to call ASAP." She stared at the message, feeling the corporate world trying to reclaim her. A week ago, such a text would have sent her into immediate crisis mode. Now she felt a strange detachment. The board seemed so distant from this garage in Millbrook, from Emma's bedtime stories and Jake's quiet strength. Sarah typed a reply. "Prepare full dossier on Millbrook plant closure 5 years ago. All financials, impact assessments, board minutes. Especially any mention of employee Jake Morrison." Melissa's response was immediate. "Looking into Millbrook now, but Sarah, this distraction could cost you everything you've built." Sarah smiled sadly at the phone. "Maybe. Or maybe it will help me rebuild something better. The next day, Sarah borrowed Jake's truck to drive into the center of Millbrook, while he took Emma to a doctor's follow-up appointment. She found herself drawn back to the abandoned Wellington family bakery, the tin of recipes clutched in her hand. The building looked different in the morning light, less a relic of the past and more a space of possibilities. Sarah peered through the grimy windows, imagining what it could be. Again, the display cases filled with pastries, the scent of fresh bread, the sound of conversations over coffee. Shame about that place. Sarah turned to find an elderly man watching her from the sidewalk, leaning heavily on a cane. It was the heart of downtown once upon a time, he continued, before the big factory closed and took half the town's jobs with it. The Wellington Foods plant, Sarah said. The man nodded. Used to be our claim to fame. Home of Wellington's finest, the welcome sign said. They took that down after the closure. I'm Sarah Wellington, she said, extending her hand. My grandfather started the bakery. The man's eyebrows shot up as he shook her hand. Well, I'll be Walter Jenkins. I worked at the plant for 37 years before the shutdown. I'd love to hear about it, Mr. Jenkins. Would you have time for coffee? 30 minutes later, they sat in Maggie's diner, where Sarah listened as Walter recounted the history of Wellington Foods in Millbrook, how the small family bakery had grown into a regional production facility, how generations of local families had built their lives around the company. Your father understood what the plant meant to Millbrook, Walter said, stirring sugar into his coffee. He visited every year new folks by name. There was talk about expanding the facility before he got sick. And after he died, Walter's face hardened. After that, we just became numbers on a spreadsheet. Some fellow in a fancy suit came down, talked about market efficiencies and consolidation strategies. 200 people out of work with barely a month's notice. Sarah winced, knowing exactly which fellow in a fancy suit had delivered that news. Henderson had handled the closure announcements, championing them to the board as necessary cost-cutting measures. What happened to the employees, she asked. Some found work in Grantsville. Some moved away entirely. Others? Walter shrugged. Millbrook's had the highest unemployment in the county ever since. And Jake Morrison, he worked at the plant as an engineer, I believe. Walter's expression brightened. Jake's one of the good ones. Could have left for a big city job, had offers too. But his daddy was sick, and then there was little Emma to think about after Linda left. So he stayed, took over the garage. Keeps half the town's cars running often for less than he should charge. As Walter continued singing Jake's praises, Sarah's mind was racing, forming connections and possibilities she'd never considered before. By the time she walked the older man back to his apartment, a plan was beginning to take shape, a way to honor her father's legacy while creating something new. Back at Jake's house, she spread the contents of the recipe tin across the kitchen table. Handwritten cards, yellowed with age, newspaper clippings of the bakery's grand opening, photos of 3 generations of Wellingtons serving their community through food and connection. When Jake and Emma returned from the doctor's appointment, they found Sarah surrounded by papers, making notes with an intensity that reminded Jake of her CEO persona, but somehow softer, more animated. Good news, Jake announced as Emma bounded into the kitchen. Clean bill of health. Doc says the new medication protocol is working. Sarah looked up, her face breaking into a genuine smile. That's wonderful, Emma. How do you feel? I feel super great, Emma declared, climbing onto a chair beside Sarah. What are you doing with all these papers? I'm exploring an idea, Sarah said, ruffling the girl's hair. A big idea that might need your expert opinion. Jake leaned against the door frame, watching them with a mixture of curiosity and warmth. Should I be worried about this big idea? Sarah met his gaze, her eyes bright with excitement. Maybe. It involves staying in Millbrook a bit longer than planned. His smile reached his eyes. I don't think that's something to worry about at all. That evening, after Emma was tucked into bed, Sarah and Jake sat on the back porch, swinging a comfortable silence between them as they watched fireflies dance across the yard. The night was cool, but not cold, the first hint of true autumn settling over Millbrook. I've been thinking, Sarah said finally, about your father's garage, about how you took over the family business and made it your own. Jake nodded. It wasn't the life I planned, but it turned out to be the life I needed. What if I stayed in Millbrook? The words tumbled out before Sarah could second-guess them. Not just for a few more days, but longer. What if I reopened the Wellington Bakery? Jake turned to face her surprise, evident in his expression. You'd leave your position as CEO, your life in Chicago. The position has brought me success but not fulfillment. In my life in Chicago, Sarah paused, realizing the truth as she spoke it. I don't actually have a life in Chicago. I have an apartment, a job, a schedule, but not a life, not like what you and Emma have here. Jake was quiet for a long moment, the swing creaking gently beneath them. Sarah, I don't want you to make a decision this big because of whatever's happening between us. That's not fair to you. It's not just about us, Sarah insisted, though her heart skipped at his acknowledgement that there was indeed something happening between them. It's about finding purpose again. My father tried to tell me before he died Wellington Foods was meant to be more than just a corporate entity. It was meant to bring people together, to be part of a community. And you think reopening the bakery would do that? Sarah nodded, warming to her idea. It would be a start, a small-scale operation focusing on quality and connection rather than mass production. And maybe eventually finding ways to bring manufacturing back to Millbrook on a scale that makes sense. Jake studied her face in the dim porch light. You're serious about this? I am. I've never been more serious about anything. His hand found hers on the swing between them, fingers intertwining naturally. Then I think it's a beautiful idea. But what about Henderson and the board? Won't they fight you on this? Sarah's grip tightened on his hand. Probably, but I own enough shares to have significant say in the company's direction. And I have some leverage they don't know about yet. Before Jake could ask what she meant, Sarah leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a soft, questioning kiss that lasted only a moment but changed everything between them. When she pulled back, Jake's eyes remained closed for a heartbeat longer, as if savoring the moment. Then he looked at her with such warmth that Sarah felt it like a physical embrace. I've been wanting to do that since you stormed into my garage in those ridiculous heels. He admitted, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sarah laughed softly. I've been wanting you to do that since you made me cinnamon rolls and showed me what matters. Jake tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending shivers down her spine. Sarah Wellington, you are turning my whole world upside down. Good, she whispered, leaning in again, because you've already turned mine. This time when their lips met, there was no hesitation, no questioning, only the certainty of two people who had found in each other something unexpected and precious. Jake's arms encircled her, drawing her closer on the swing, and Sarah melted into him, feeling as though she'd finally found her way home after a very long journey. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of Emma's laughter drifting up from the kitchen. She dressed quickly in jeans and a borrowed sweater of Jake's that smelled comfortingly of his soap and the autumn air, then made her way downstairs. The scene that greeted her was like something from a life she'd never dared imagine for herself. Jake at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Emma set the table, both of them singing along to a song on the radio, with more enthusiasm than skill. They looked up when she entered, twin smiles warming her heart. Good morning, Jake said, his eyes conveying so much more than the simple greeting. We're making breakfast, Emma announced proudly. Daddy said you need brain food for your big idea day. Sarah accepted the mug of coffee Jake handed her, their fingers brushing in a deliberate caress. Is that what today is, my big idea day? You said you wanted to check out the bakery building more thoroughly, Jake reminded her. I called Walter at the city clerk's office. He's bringing the property records and original blueprints to the diner at 10. Sarah blinked, touched by his support. You've been busy this morning. We Morrisons are very efficient, Jake said with a wink. Besides, I know what it's like to have a dream that needs wings. After breakfast, Sarah insisted on washing the dishes while Jake got Emma ready for school. As she stood at the sink looking out at the backyard with its tire swing and vegetable garden, she felt a contentment that had eluded her for years. The persistent ache of something missing, something she tried to fill with acquisitions and achievements, had quieted to a whisper. Her phone buzzed on the counter, Melissa again, with a message that sent ice through Sarah's veins. Henderson found out about Morrison, claims conflict of interest. Emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Immediate return to Chicago required or risk removal as CEO. Before Sarah could process this, a second message appeared. Attached file, Morrison lawsuit.pdf. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the document. It was a legal complaint filed by Wellington Foods against Jake Morrison 6 years ago, alleging theft of proprietary information and breach of contract. The case had been settled out of court with the terms sealed. Jake had been sued by her company, and he'd never mentioned it. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs gave her just enough time to lock her phone and set it face down on the counter. She forced a smile as he entered the kitchen, but something in her expression must have betrayed her because his own smile faltered. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," Sarah lied, her mind racing. "Just a message from Melissa about work." Jake studied her for a moment, then nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "I'm going to drop Emma at school. Want to come along then? Head to the diner to meet Walter." "Actually, I need to make a few calls first. Business stuff." The excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'll meet you at the diner at 10. After they left, Sarah retrieved her phone and read through the lawsuit details more carefully. According to the complaint, Jake had been terminated from Wellington Foods for allegedly downloading confidential technical specifications before the plant closure announcement. The company had claimed he was preparing to sell the information to competitors. The Jake Morrison described in these legal documents bore no resemblance to the man she'd come to know, the honest, hard-working father who put his community before profit. Yet the evidence seemed damning: access logs showing late-night downloads files found on his personal devices. Sarah paced the kitchen, her earlier contentment shattered. Why hadn't Jake told her about this? Had their entire connection been built on a lie? Was his kindness to her the stranded CEO of the company that had sued him merely an elaborate form of revenge? She thought of their kiss the night before, of the way he'd looked at her with such genuine warmth. Had it all been an act? By the time she arrived at Maggie's diner 20 minutes late for their meeting with Walter, Sarah had worked herself into a state of confused anger. Jake was already there, seated at a corner table with Walter and a stack of blueprints, his expression lighting up when he saw her enter. That unguarded joy in his eyes made her doubt her suspicions, but the weight of the undisclosed lawsuit hung heavy between them. "Sorry I'm late," she said stiffly, sliding into the booth beside Walter rather than Jake. Jake's brow furrowed at her tone, but he simply said, "Walter was just showing me the original layout of the bakery. The space is bigger than it looks from outside." For the next hour, Sarah forced herself to focus on the blueprints and property records, asking questions about zoning and utilities, while carefully avoiding direct interaction with Jake. Walter, either oblivious to the tension or tactfully ignoring it, enthusiastically shared his knowledge of the building's history. "The property's been in bank foreclosure since Wellington Foods stopped paying the lease," Walter explained. "They kept ownership after closing the plant, but let everything lapse about 2 years ago. Bank would probably be happy to sell it for a reasonable offer." Sarah nodded, making notes while feeling Jake's concerned gaze on her. "What about the equipment? Was it removed when the bakery closed?" "Most of it's still there, just covered up. Your family built things to last, Ms. Wellington." When Walter excused himself to use the restroom, Jake immediately leaned across the table. "What's going on, Sarah? You've barely looked at me since you got here. Why didn't you tell me Wellington Foods sued you for theft?" The words burst from her before she could moderate her tone. Jake's face drained of color. "How did you—" "Henderson found out about our connection. He sent me the lawsuit details." Sarah kept her voice low, aware of the diner's other patrons. "You were accused of stealing proprietary information before the plant closed. Were you planning to use it against the company? Against my father's legacy?" Jake's expression hardened. "Is that what you think, that I've been, what, playing some long game of revenge by fixing your car and letting you into my home, into my daughter's life?" The hurt in his voice made Sarah falter, but she pressed on. "I don't know what to think. You never mentioned being sued by my company, even after I told you who I was." "Because it was humiliating," Jake hissed, leaning closer. "Because I was innocent, but fighting a corporate legal team was impossible. Because I had a sick father and a toddler to think about, so I signed their settlement and gag order." Sarah wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root. The evidence was circumstantial at best, manipulated at worst. Jake ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Yes, I downloaded files, technical specs for machinery I'd helped design. I was trying to document my work before the closure to update my portfolio for job applications. It was stupid and technically against policy, but it wasn't theft or industrial espionage." Walter returned, pausing when he sensed the tension. "Everything all right here?" Jake stood abruptly. "Ms. Wellington has some concerns about the property that she needs to consider privately." "I should get back to the garage anyway." Customers waiting. Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, the bell above the diner door jangling in his wake. Walter settled back into his seat with a concerned frown. Lovers quarrel. Sarah blinked at the blunt assessment. We're not, it's complicated. Always is, Walter agreed sagely. But if I might offer some unsolicited advice, Jake Morrison's the most honest man in this town. If he says something, you can take it to the bank. Sarah stared at the blueprints spread before her, the promise of a new beginning, now tainted by suspicion and hurt. I want to believe that. Then do, Walter said simply. Trust's a choice before it's as a feeling, my late wife always said. Trust. Such a simple word for such a complex emotion. Sarah had spent her corporate career cultivating a healthy skepticism, looking for hidden agendas and ulterior motives in every interaction. But here in Millbrook with Jake and Emma, she'd begun to lower those defenses to believe in the possibility of genuine connection. Now she felt caught between two worlds, the corporate mindset that saw potential threats in every corner and the simpler, more trusting approach to life that Jake embodied. I should go talk to him, she said finally. Walter nodded approval. Communication. Another good choice. But when Sarah arrived at Morrison's Auto Repair, Jake's assistant informed her that he'd left to pick up parts in Grantsville and wouldn't be back until evening. Whether this was true or a convenient excuse to avoid her, Sarah couldn't be sure. With nowhere else to go, she walked to the abandoned bakery and sat on the curb outside, staring at the faded sign that bore her family name. Everything had seemed so clear just hours ago, her growing feelings for Jake, her vision for revitalizing the bakery, her willingness to leave corporate life behind. Now uncertainty clouded every thought. She pulled out her phone and called the one person who might help her make sense of the situation. Sarah, Melissa answered on the first ring. Thank God. Are you on your way back to Chicago? Not yet. I need more information about the Morrison lawsuit. Not just the official complaint, everything. Board discussions, settlement terms, who pushed for legal action. Melissa's sigh was audible. Sarah, this isn't the time for a deep dive into ancient legal history. Henderson has called for a vote of no confidence. You need to be here tomorrow to defend your position. This is connected, Melissa. I need to understand what really happened. What does it matter Morrison was just one employee out of hundreds who lost their jobs in that closure? It matters to me, Sarah said firmly. Get me those files, and Melissa, don't tell Henderson we had this conversation. After hanging up, Sarah continued sitting outside the bakery as afternoon faded into evening, wrestling with her thoughts. Eventually, she made her way back to Jake's house, finding it dark and empty. A note on the kitchen counter read simply, staying at Emma's friend's house for a sleepover. Didn't want to disturb your plans. J.U.N. The coolness of the message was a stark contrast to their warm exchange that morning. Sarah felt the loss acutely, this tentative connection that had brought her more joy in a week than her corporate achievements had in years. She made herself a simple dinner from leftovers in the refrigerator, the silence of the house emphasizing her sudden solitude. As she washed her single plate and glass, Sarah caught herself listening for Emma's laughter or Jake's steady footstep sounds that had quickly become the comforting soundtrack to her days in Millbrook. Her phone chimed with an email from Melissa. Found these in the archive server. Call me when you've reviewed. The attached files told a story very different from the official lawsuit. Internal emails between Henderson and legal counsel revealed a targeted effort to make an example of Jake after he had voiced concerns about the closure's impact on the community. One particularly damning exchange showed Henderson directing IT to examine Jake's computer access until they find something we can use. The settlement had been engineered to silence Jake with a modest payout and stringent non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, he'd agreed never to discuss the case or circumstances of his termination, effectively preventing him from defending his reputation or explaining his side to future employers. Most shocking of all was a brief mention in a board meeting transcript. James Wellington. Sarah's father had objected to the legal action against Jake, calling it vindictive and contrary to our company values. He'd been outvoted while undergoing cancer treatment, too ill to fight effectively against Henderson's influence. Sarah sat at Jake's kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as the full picture emerged. Her father had tried to protect Jake, seeing in him the values that Wellington Foods had been founded upon. And Jake had never told Sarah about any of this because he legally couldn't, and perhaps because he didn't want to taint her view of her father's company. She had misjudged him completely, allowing corporate suspicion to override what her heart already knew. Jake Morrison was a man of integrity exactly as he'd presented himself to be. The sound of a key in the front door startled her from these revelations. Jake entered looking tired and wary when he saw her at the table. "I thought you might have gone back to Chicago," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah stood wiping tears from her cheeks. "I owe you an apology. A massive, unqualified apology." Jake remained by the door, maintaining his distance. "For what part exactly?" "For doubting you. For believing even for a moment that you could be the person described in that lawsuit." Sarah took a shaky breath. "I found the truth, Jake, about how Henderson targeted you for speaking up about the closure, about how my father tried to stop it." Something in Jake's rigid posture softened slightly. "You weren't supposed to know about any of that. The NDA doesn't apply to information I discovered independently," Sarah finished, "and it certainly doesn't prevent me from telling you how sorry I am for jumping to conclusions." Jake moved further into the kitchen, but still kept the table between them. "The lawsuit wasn't about proprietary information, Sarah. It was about silencing criticism. Henderson didn't want anyone questioning the closure, especially not someone with my technical knowledge of the plant's efficiency. I know that now, and I know my father stood up for you." Jake nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "James Wellington was a good man. After the settlement, he reached out privately. Couldn't offer me my job. Back, the plant was already closing, but he wrote a personal recommendation that helped me land consulting work until I could get the garage up and running. That's why I never held Wellington Foods against you. I knew the difference between the company and the family behind it." Sarah circled the table slowly, closing the distance between them. "Why didn't you tell me any of this when I first arrived? When you found out who I was?" "Partly the NDA, partly pride," Jake shrugged, "and partly because it didn't matter anymore. That chapter was closed. Or so I thought until you showed up and blew into my life like a hurricane." "A hurricane?" Sarah managed a watery smile. "That doesn't sound very flattering." "Hurricanes can be destructive," Jake acknowledged, taking a step toward her. "But they also clear away what's stagnant, make room for new growth. Sometimes we need our lives to be shaken up a little." They stood facing each other now, close enough to touch, but both hesitating at the threshold of reconciliation. "I'm still going to Chicago tomorrow," Sarah said quietly. "I have to face the board deal with Henderson." Jake's expression remained carefully guarded. And then I'm coming back to Millbrook, if that's still okay with you and Emma." The last of his reserve crumbled, and Jake reached for her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "More than okay," he murmured against her hair. "We've gotten used to having you around Wellington. The house feels empty without you." Sarah melted into his arms, the tension of the day dissolving in the warmth of his forgiveness. "I've gotten used to being here too, more than I ever thought possible." When Jake kissed her this time, it was different from their first kiss on the porch, deeper, more certain, sealed with the knowledge that they had weathered their first real conflict and emerged stronger for it. Later, as they sat together on the couch, Sarah outlined her plan for confronting the board and Henderson. Jake listened intently, offering suggestions based on his own experience with the company. "He'll fight dirty," Jake warned. "Henderson's not used to losing." "Neither am I," Sarah replied with newfound determination. "And I have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "The truth about what Wellington Foods was meant to be. What it can be again." She squeezed his hand. "And someone worth fighting for." Jake's smile was warm with promise. "Just make sure you come back to us, Sarah Wellington. Emma's already planning what cookies you'll bake together this weekend." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Sarah promised, sealing the vow with another kiss. The next morning dawned clear and cool, autumn colors painting the trees along the highway as Jake drove Sarah to the Chicago-bound train. They had agreed this was a battle she needed to face alone, though he would be with her in spirit. At the small Grantsville station, they stood on the platform, reluctant to part despite their confidence in reunion. "Call me when it's over," Jake said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in what had already become a familiar gesture of affection. "It might be late," Sarah warned. "I'll wait up." His kiss was gentle but full of promise. "We both will." On the train, Sarah watched the rural landscape gradually give way to suburbs and then the Chicago skyline. With each mile, she felt herself shifting, not back into her CEO persona entirely, but into a new integration of the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. Melissa was waiting at Union Station, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "You look different," she observed as they walked to the waiting car. "I am different," Sarah confirmed, "but still focused enough to handle Henderson and the board." About that, Melissa hesitated. "There's something you should know before the meeting. Henderson's been making calls to major shareholders. He's positioned himself as the stable alternative to your unpredictable behavior." "Let him try," Sarah said calmly. "I've found his weak spot." "Which is," Sarah smiled, feeling a confidence that came not from corporate power, but from absolute moral clarity. "He built his reputation on cost-cutting measures that boosted short-term profits at the expense of long-term sustainability. The Millbrook closure is just one example. I'm betting there are others with similar stories of targeted legal action to silence criticism." Melissa's eyes widened. "You're going to expose him." "I'm going to remind the board what Wellington Foods was founded to be and what it lost when it started valuing profit over people." The Wellington Foods headquarters loomed above them, glass and steel reaching toward the clouds. As the elevator carried her upward, Sarah felt a strange detachment from the corporate trappings that had once defined her success. The boardroom fell silent when she entered, all eyes tracking her progress to the head of the table. Henderson sat midway down, his expression a carefully composed mask of concern. "Sarah," he greeted her with false warmth, "we're relieved you could join us. Your extended absence has raised concerns among the board." Sarah set her briefcase on the table, taking her time to survey the faces around her, some supportive, some worried, all waiting to see how this corporate drama would unfold. "Before we begin," she said calmly, "I'd like to address the elephant in the room. Yes, I've been in Millbrook, Illinois for the past 10 days. What began as a car breakdown evolved into something much more significant, a rediscovery of Wellington Foods' roots and original mission." Henderson's smile tightened. "While your interest in company history is admirable, it hardly justifies abandoning your responsibilities during critical negotiations." "The Yamamoto deal is proceeding on schedule," Sarah countered. "But more importantly, I've uncovered information about company practices that the board should be aware of, practices that undermine our long-term sustainability and betray our founding values." She opened her briefcase and distributed folders to each board member. "These documents detail a pattern of targeted legal action against employees who raised valid concerns about plant closures and corporate practices. The Millbrook case is particularly troubling." Henderson's face darkened as he flipped through the contents. "This is ancient history and most of it confidential. How did you access these files?" "I'm the CEO, Richard. I have access to everything." Sarah turned to address the full board. "My father founded this company on the principle that good business and good ethics go hand in hand. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that vision." For the next hour, Sarah outlined her findings and her vision for Wellington Foods' future, a hybrid approach that balanced profitability with community investment, starting with a revitalization of the original bakery in Millbrook as a pilot program for similar initiatives in other communities affected by closures. Henderson fought back with financial projections and shareholder expectations, but Sarah countered each argument with both data and conviction. The board members listened, asked questions, debated among themselves as the afternoon stretched into evening. Finally, the chairwoman called for a vote on Henderson's motion of no confidence. Sarah held her breath as hands were raised, 5 for, 7 against. The motion failed. Henderson's face flushed with anger. "This is a mistake. She's throwing away years of growth for some small-town nostalgia trip." "That's enough, Richard," the chairwoman said firmly. "The board has spoken. However, Sarah, we do have concerns about the feasibility of your community investment strategy. We'd like to see a more detailed proposal before committing resources." "I understand," Sarah agreed. "I'll have a comprehensive plan for you within 30 days, including projected costs and benefits for the Millbrook pilot program." As the meeting adjourned, Henderson approached her, his voice low and threatening. "This isn't over, Sarah. Your mechanic boyfriend may have captured your heart, but the shareholders won't be so easily swayed by sentiment." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "It's not sentiment, Richard. It's sound business strategy for long-term growth. And Jake didn't capture my heart, he reminded me I had one." Henderson's sneer deepened. "You really have gone native in that backwater town. Your father would be disappointed to see his company reduced to a charity case. My father, Sarah said with quiet conviction, would recognize that I'm finally building the company he always envisioned, one that measures success not just in dollars, but in lives improved. That was his true legacy, not the quarterly reports you worship. She left him standing there, shoulders slumped in temporary defeat, and walked out of the boardroom with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The battle wasn't over. Henderson would regroup. Shareholders would need convincing, but she had won this round, and more importantly, she had found her purpose again. Melissa was waiting in Sarah's office, anxiously pacing. Well, what happened? Henderson's motion failed, Sarah said, gathering a few personal items from her desk. I'm still CEO, but with a new direction for the company. So you're staying in Chicago? Melissa looked relieved. Sarah shook her head, smiling. No, I'm going home. To Millbrook. I'll commute for board meetings and essential functions, but my focus will be on building our community investment pilot program there. Because of this Jake person, Melissa couldn't hide her skepticism. Because of what I found in Millbrook Connection Purpose, a life beyond spreadsheets and acquisition targets. Sarah placed a framed photo of her father in her bag. I've been chasing success without stopping to define what success actually means to me. Now I know. Outside, night had fallen over Chicago, the city lights sparkling against the darkness. Sarah hailed a taxi to take her back to Union Station, her heart already reaching ahead to Millbrook, to Jake and Emma waiting for her return. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. How did it go? Sarah smiled as she typed her reply. Still CEO, Henderson defeated but not destroyed, board cautiously supportive of new direction. Most importantly, coming home tonight. Last train leaves at 9. His response was immediate. We'll be waiting. Emma made welcome home cookies. I'm making something else. What's that? She texted back. Plans for the future. Our future if you want it. Sarah pressed the phone to her heart, feeling it race with anticipation and joy. For the first time in her adult life, she was choosing a path based not on ambition or obligation, but on love for a man and his daughter, love for a community that needed healing, love for the legacy her father had always intended her to carry forward. As the taxi wove through Chicago's busy streets, Sarah Wellington looked back at the gleaming skyscrapers without regret. Her future lay in a different direction, in a small town with an abandoned bakery, a little girl with wise eyes, and a man who had reminded her what truly mattered. The next chapter was waiting, and she couldn't get there fast enough. The return to Millbrook felt like coming home. As the train pulled into the small Grantsville station, Sarah spotted Jake's truck in the parking lot, Emma's small face pressed against the passenger window, her breath fogging the glass in her excitement. The sight made Sarah's heart swell with an emotion she was still learning to name, not just affection or attachment, but belonging. Jake stood beside the truck, hands in his pockets against the autumn chill, his face breaking into a smile as Sarah descended from the train. She barely had time to set down her bag before Emma launched herself forward, wrapping small arms around Sarah's waist. You came back, just like you promised. Sarah knelt to return the hug properly. Of course I did. I always keep my promises to important people. Over Emma's head, her eyes met Jake's. His expression held a mixture of pride, relief, and something deeper that made her breath catch. When she straightened, he pulled her into an embrace that felt like sanctuary after the corporate battlefield she'd just navigated. Welcome home, he murmured against her hair. Home. Such a simple word for such a profound concept. Chicago had never felt like home, not really just a place where she lived, worked, succeeded. But this small town with its abandoned bakery and struggling community, this man with his quiet strength and moral compass, this child with her wisdom beyond years, somehow they had become home in just a matter of weeks. The drive back to Millbrook was filled with Emma's excited chatter about school projects and Jake's quiet questions about the board meeting. Sarah shared her victory over Henderson, the conditional support for her community investment strategy, and the 30-day deadline for a comprehensive proposal. So you have a month to convince them the Millbrook project is viable, Jake summarized as they pulled into the driveway of their house. Sarah nodded. A month to translate vision into concrete plans, financial projections, community impact assessments. It won't be easy, but I've handled tougher challenges. Not alone you haven't, Jake said, turning off the engine. You've got a town full of people ready to help make this happen. Inside, the house smelled of fresh-baked cookies and the chicken stew Emma had proudly announced they'd prepared for dinner. The kitchen table was set with a handmade welcome home sign decorated with Emma's colorful drawings of what appeared to be a bakery, complete with stick figures labeled Ms. Sarah, Daddy, and me. "Do you like it?" Emma asked anxiously. "I made it during art time." Sarah traced the crayon outlines with her fingertip. "It's beautiful, Emma. The best welcome home I've ever received." That night, after Emma was tucked into bed with 2 stories and an extra goodnight hug, Sarah and Jake sat at the kitchen table with laptops, notebooks, and steaming mugs of tea, beginning the work of transforming vision into reality. "The bakery building needs significant renovation," Sarah noted, reviewing the inspection report Walter had arranged. "Electrical, plumbing, commercial kitchen equipment, it's a substantial investment." Jake studied the figures with the analytical eye of an engineer. "The bones are good, though. That's what matters. And if we get the community involved in the renovation, we can reduce labor costs while building investment in the project." Sarah asked, the word catching her attention. Jake glanced up, a hint of uncertainty crossing his features. "I assumed. But if you'd rather handle this independently—" "No," Sarah interrupted, reaching for his hand. "I like we. I just wasn't sure if you wanted to be involved to that extent." His fingers intertwined with hers. "Sarah, I'm all in. Whatever this becomes, the bakery Wellington Foods' new direction, I'm all in." The simple declaration cemented something between them, a partnership that transcended romance or business to become a shared purpose, a joint vision for the future. Over the next 2 weeks, that vision began taking tangible form. Sarah converted Jake's rarely used home office into a command center for the Millbrook project, as they'd begun calling it. Wall charts tracked renovation timelines, community meetings generated input and volunteer commitments, and local businesses pledged support in various forms. The abandoned Wellington Family Bakery became a hub of activity. Volunteers helped clear decades of dust and neglect, revealing the beautiful bones of the historic building. The original hardwood floors emerged from beneath layers of linoleum, and the vintage tin ceiling, once properly cleaned, gleamed in the sunlight streaming through newly washed windows. Sarah split her time between hands-on work at the bakery and the detailed planning required for the board presentation. Jake contributed his engineering expertise to assess and upgrade the building's systems while maintaining his regular work at the garage. Emma appointed herself official morale officer, bringing cookies to volunteers and sharing her increasingly elaborate visions for the bakery's future. "We should have a special table just for kids," she informed Sarah seriously as they painted the bakery's back office, "with small chairs and books and maybe a place to color while grown-ups talk about boring stuff." Sarah smiled, adding the suggestion to her growing list. "That's an excellent idea. What else do you think would make the bakery special?" Emma considered this with the gravity only a 5-year-old could muster. "Stories. Daddy says your grandpa used to tell stories in the old bakery. We should have story time like at the library, but with cookies." The innocent suggestion triggered a memory. Sarah's grandfather gathering children around his flour-dusted apron, spinning tales of magical bakers and enchanted ovens, while their parents enjoyed coffee and conversation. Community building through the simple act of breaking bread together. "Emma Morrison," Sarah said, pressing a gentle kiss to the child's forehead, "you are absolutely brilliant." As the renovation progressed, Sarah noticed a change in the town itself. People who had previously regarded her with cautious curiosity now greeted her with genuine warmth. Offers of help multiplied, from Mrs. Patterson's donation of vintage bakery memorabilia to Dr. Martinez organizing a fundraising dinner at his church. The Millbrook project was becoming exactly what Sarah had hoped, not just a business venture, but a catalyst for community renewal. Each night she returned to Jake's house, their house increasingly exhausted, but fulfilled in a way her corporate achievements had never managed. And each night Jake was there with dinner conversation and eventually the comfort of his arms as their relationship deepened into something neither had expected, but both treasured. "My grandmother would have liked you," Jake told her one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "She always said you could tell a person's character by how they handle unexpected detours." Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "Breaking down in Millbrook was the best detour I've ever taken. Even with Henderson still gunning for your job, the board's skepticism, all the work ahead. Even with all of that," she confirmed, "for the first time in my adult life, I'm building something that aligns with my values instead of just my ambitions." Jake's arm tightened around her shoulders. I'm proud of you, Sarah Wellington. Not many people have the courage to reinvent themselves mid-career. I'm not reinventing, Sarah corrected gently. I'm remembering who I was meant to be all along. 18 days into their 30-day timeline, with the bakery renovation progressing ahead of schedule and the business plan nearly complete, the first hint of trouble arrived in an innocuous email from Melissa. Henderson meeting privately with major shareholders. Unknown agenda. Watch your back. Sarah frowned at her laptop screen, a chill of foreboding disrupting her previously confident mood. Henderson had been suspiciously quiet since the failed no-confidence vote. Experience had taught her that his silence rarely signaled surrender. More likely, he was regrouping for a more strategic attack. She called Melissa from the bakery's newly installed landline. What exactly is Henderson up to? She asked without preamble. I don't know, Melissa admitted. He's being unusually secretive, using his private email, holding meetings off-site. But I overheard him mention Millbrook to Johnson from legal, and he didn't sound happy. Sarah's grip tightened on the receiver. Has he accessed any of my files on the community investment strategy? Not through official channels. But Sarah, Melissa hesitated, the Yamamoto deal is stalling. They're asking for stronger reassurances about leadership stability. Henderson's doing, Sarah concluded. He's undermining confidence in my leadership to force the board's hand. Probably. What do you want me to do? Sarah considered her options. Direct confrontation with Henderson would likely accelerate whatever scheme he was developing. Better to gather intelligence first. Keep monitoring the situation, she decided. And Melissa, secure all my files on the Millbrook project. Backup copies, restricted access. I don't want any surprises. After hanging up, Sarah stared out the bakery's front window at the Millbrook Main Street. The town was showing subtle signs of renewal. Already a new coat of paint on the barbershop across the street, flower boxes appearing outside Maggie's Diner, a coming soon sign, in a previously vacant storefront. Hope was taking root, tender and vulnerable. She couldn't allow Henderson to destroy that hope for the sake of corporate politics. But how to outmaneuver someone willing to play dirty when she was committed to ethical business practices? Jake found her still pondering this question when he arrived with lunch sandwiches from Maggie's and coffee in to-go cups. You look worried, he observed, setting the food on the counter they'd recently installed. Board issues. Sarah shared Melissa's warning, watching Jake's expression shift from concern to determination. Henderson's the type who only understands power, he said after a moment. We need to demonstrate that the Millbrook project has powerful support community, investment political backing, positive media coverage. Make it too costly for him to oppose. Sarah smiled despite her worry. I like how that sounds. We're a team now, Jake said simply. Your fights are my fights. That afternoon, they developed a two-pronged strategy. Sarah would accelerate work on the board presentation, compiling irrefutable evidence of the project's viability, while Jake would activate his extensive community network to generate visible public support that would make the project difficult to dismiss. The next week passed in a blur of focused activity. Sarah secured provisional commitments from local suppliers, drafted hiring plans that prioritized former plant employees, and developed financial projections showing modest but sustainable growth. Jake organized a community forum that drew over 100 residents, all expressing enthusiastic support for the bakery's revival and the potential return of food production to Millbrook. Emma contributed in her own way, creating a Wellington's Kids Corner proposal, complete with crayon illustrations of reading nooks and cookie decorating stations. Her kindergarten class wrote letters about what the bakery meant to their families, stories passed down from parents and grandparents who remembered the original establishment. 7 days before the board presentation deadline, Sarah received another call from Melissa, her voice tight with urgency. Henderson's made his move. He's proposing a complete corporate restructuring that would eliminate the community investment division before it even starts. Board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. Sarah's blood ran cold. He can't do that. The board already approved the concept. They approved a 30-day exploration period. Henderson's arguing that preliminary analysis shows insufficient ROI. He's prepared a comprehensive alternative strategy focused on Asian market expansion. The Yamamoto deal, Sarah realized. He's leveraging my absence to position himself as the international expansion expert. Exactly. Sarah, you need to get back to Chicago, tonight. Sarah glanced around the bakery at the freshly painted walls, the vintage equipment they'd painstakingly restored the community bulletin board but already filled with notes of support and memories of the original establishment. They were so close to making it real. Book me on the last train, she said finally. And Melissa, prepare the Millbrook presentation. All of it. We're moving up the timeline. Jake returned from the garage to find Sarah packing her briefcase with presentation materials and financial reports. Henderson, he guessed, reading her expression. Sarah nodded grimly. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. He's trying to kill the project before we can present the full proposal. Jake's jaw tightened. What can I do? Come with me, Sarah said impulsively, to Chicago to the board meeting. They need to hear from someone who can speak to the community impact firsthand. What about Emma? Mrs. Patterson already offered to watch her anytime we needed, and it's just overnight. Sarah took his hands. Jake, this is our project, not just mine. The board should see that. His expression softened. Our project, our fight, our future, Sarah added quietly. The evening train to Chicago carried them away from Millbrook just as dusk was settling over the town. Sarah spent the journey finalizing her presentation, grateful for Jake's steady presence beside her, his engineer's mind, helping refine technical aspects and identify potential weaknesses in their proposal. They arrived at her penthouse apartment near midnight, a space that felt strangely alien to Sarah now. Its minimalist luxuries stark and impersonal after the warm clutter of Jake's home. She watched his face as he took in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the designer furniture, the spectacular city view. This was your life, he said, not a question but an observation. A part of it, Sarah acknowledged, the part I thought defined me. Jake turned to her, backlit by the city lights. And now I know better. She moved into his arms, drawing strength from his solid presence. No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm not coming back to this life. My place is in Millbrook now, with you and Emma, with the bakery, with the community we're building. His kiss held both tenderness and promise, a foundation to stand on as they prepared to face Henderson and the board. Morning arrived too quickly, dawn breaking over Chicago's skyline as they prepared for battle. Sarah dressed in her CEO armor, a tailored suit, impeccable. Makeup hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. Jake wore his best clothes, pressed slacks, and a button-down shirt that Sarah recognized as probably reserved for church and parent-teacher conferences. You look like a CEO, he commented as they rode the elevator down to the waiting car. And you look like the most honest man in the room, she replied, which is exactly what we need today. Wellington Foods headquarters loomed before them, glass and steel reaching toward the clouds. In the lobby, Melissa waited with coffee and last-minute updates. Henderson's already upstairs with the board, she reported, eyeing Jake with curious assessment. He brought Johnson from legal and the entire Asian markets team. They've been presenting for 20 minutes already. Sarah's grip tightened on her portfolio. Then we better not waste any more time. The elevator ride to the executive floor passed in tense silence. Before the doors opened, Jake squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture so small yet so fortifying that Sarah felt her resolve strengthen. Whatever Henderson had planned, they would face it together. The boardroom fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to assess not just Sarah, but the man accompanying her. Henderson stood at the head of the table, his presentation displayed on the large screen behind him, graphs and projections highlighting the potential of the Yamamoto deal. Sarah, he recovered quickly, professional smile firmly in place. We weren't expecting you. The board kindly agreed to hear my alternative strategy while awaiting your full proposal. How convenient, Sarah replied coolly, taking her position at the opposite end of the table. Since I have that full proposal ready today, board members, I'd like to introduce Jake Morrison, Community Liaison for the Millbrook Project, and a key stakeholder in our community investment strategy. Jake nodded respectfully to the assembled executives, his quiet confidence a stark contrast to Henderson's polished corporate persona. Mr. Morrison. Henderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. The mechanic, correct. I wasn't aware Wellington Foods had started bringing service providers to board meetings. Jake is an engineer by training, Sarah corrected smoothly, and a small business owner whose insights into community economic development have been invaluable to our project planning. Before Henderson could respond, Sarah launched into her presentation outlining the Millbrook Project's vision implementation strategy, financial projections, and community impact assessments. Jake contributed key points about local employment potential and community support, his straightforward delivery lending authenticity to their proposal. The board members listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that Sarah and Jake answered as a seamless team. Even Henderson's attempts to highlight potential weaknesses were met with well-prepared responses and contingency plans. As Sarah concluded, the energy in the room had shifted perceptibly in their favor. She could see it in the engaged expressions, the nodding heads, the way several board members were already discussing implementation details among themselves. "This is certainly creative," Henderson acknowledged, his tone suggesting this wasn't a compliment. "But the ROI timeline is significantly longer than our shareholders typically expect, and the initial investment is substantial for what amounts to a nostalgia project." "It's not nostalgia," Jake spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "It's reconnection with core values that made Wellington Foods successful in the first place. Values that build sustainable growth through community partnership rather than just extraction." Henderson's smile tightened. "Admirable sentiments, Mr. Morrison. But this is a business, not a charity. Our responsibility is to shareholder value." "Short-term or long-term value?" Sarah challenged. "Because this strategy builds brand loyalty, community goodwill, and sustainable market presence that will generate returns for decades, not just quarters." The chairwoman, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. "I believe we've heard two compelling visions today. Richard's international expansion strategy and Sarah's community investment approach both have merit. Perhaps there's a way to pursue both with appropriate resource allocation and benchmarks." Henderson's expression darkened momentarily before he regained his professional mask. "Of course, Madame Chairwoman, though implementation would require clear leadership and unified direction." "Which I'm prepared to provide," Sarah asserted confidently. "The Yamamoto deal and the Millbrook project can proceed in parallel, strengthening different aspects of our business simultaneously." The board voted to approve both initiatives with appropriate funding allocations, scheduling monthly progress reviews to ensure both paths remain viable. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah accepted congratulations from several board members, noting Henderson's conspicuous absence from these exchanges. "He left immediately," Melissa informed her when they exited the boardroom. "Didn't look happy." Jake squeezed Sarah's hand. "We did it. First hurdle cleared." "First of many," Sarah cautioned, though she couldn't suppress her smile. "But yes, this is a significant victory." They were gathering their materials when Johnson from legal appeared in the doorway, his expression uncommonly grave. "Sarah, you should see this." He handed her a tablet displaying a legal document. "Henderson filed it this morning before the meeting. I only just discovered it during routine review." Sarah scanned the document, her blood turning to ice. It was an injunction against the Millbrook project, citing zoning violations, improper permits, and potential environmental concerns with the bakery renovation. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "We've followed every regulation, obtained all required permits." "It doesn't matter if it's valid," Johnson interrupted grimly. "What matters is that it will delay the project while being investigated, potentially for months." Jake read over her shoulder, his face hardening. "He's playing dirty, using legal maneuvers to undermine what he couldn't stop in the boardroom." "Can we fight this?" Sarah asked Johnson. "Of course, but it will take time, legal resources, possibly court appearances." The lawyer's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Meanwhile, the project remains in limbo. Sarah felt a cold fury building within her, not just at Henderson's underhanded tactics, but at the system that enabled such corporate gamesmanship at the expense of real people and communities. "Thank you, Johnson. Please begin preparing our response." After he left, Sarah turned to Jake. "I'm so sorry. I should have anticipated this." "Not your fault," Jake assured her, though his disappointment was evident. "Henderson fights to win, regardless of collateral damage." Sarah's phone rang, Melissa calling from the executive floor reception desk. "Sarah, there's something happening at the Millbrook property. The local sheriff just called the office asking for you. Something about unauthorized demolition." "What? That's impossible. The renovation is fully permitted." Sarah froze as the pieces clicked into place. "Henderson, this is part of his plan." Jake was already moving toward the door. "We need to get back to Millbrook, now." The train ride back to Grantsville was the longest 3 hours of Sarah's life. She spent the time alternating between calls to Melissa the Millbrook sheriff and their renovation contractor, piecing together Henderson's scheme. He hired a demolition crew claiming to represent Wellington Foods' corporate interests, she explained to Jake as the Illinois countryside blurred past the window. They showed up this morning with paperwork that looked legitimate enough to confuse the local officials. Started tearing out the restored fixtures before Walter recognized something was wrong and called the sheriff. Jake's expression was grim. How bad is the damage? Walter says they managed to stop them before they did structural harm, but much of our restoration work is destroyed. The vintage counters, the tin ceiling, the display cases all gone. Jake's hands clenched into fists on his knees. All that work, all those community volunteers who gave their time, their hope. I know. Sarah felt sick with guilt and rage. Henderson knew exactly what he was doing, attacking not just the physical structure, but the community's emotional investment in the project. What's our next move? Jake asked after a moment, his practical nature reasserting itself. Sarah squared her shoulders. First we assess the damage, then we rebuild again, and we find a way to neutralize Henderson before he can cause more harm. When they finally arrived in Millbrook, the scene at the bakery was worse than Sarah had feared. A crowd of townspeople had gathered, their expressions shifting from anger to relief when they spotted Sarah and Jake. The building's facade remained intact, but through the windows, Sarah could see the devastation inside: splintered wood, torn-out fixtures, the beautiful restoration reduced to debris. Walter approached them, his elderly face lined with distress. They had papers, Sarah. Official-looking documents saying the property was being reclaimed for corporate use. By the time we realized something was wrong, "It's not your fault, Walter." Sarah squeezed his arm reassuringly. This was a deliberate attack orchestrated by someone who knows exactly how to manipulate the system. Jake was already inside assessing the damage with his engineer's eye. Sarah followed, her heart sinking as she cataloged everything they'd lost, not just materials and labor, but momentum and morale. The structure is still sound, Jake reported, running his hand along an exposed beam. But we're looking at weeks of additional work, thousands in materials. The bell above the door jingled as more townspeople entered. Maggie from the diner, Otter, Martinez, Mrs. Patterson with Emma in tow. The little girl ran to her father, eyes wide as she took in the destruction. "What happened to our bakery?" she asked, her small voice trembling. Jake knelt to her level. "Someone made a mistake, sweetheart, but we're going to fix it. Can we still have the kids' corner?" Jake looked to Sarah, the question in his eyes extending beyond Emma's immediate concern. Could they recover from this setback? Was the fight still worth fighting? Sarah surveyed the gathered townspeople, their concerned faces, their ready hands, their investment in this shared dream. Something crystallized within her, a determination beyond corporate strategy or personal ambition. "Yes, Emma," she said firmly. "We're still going to have the kids' corner and everything else we planned. This is just a temporary setback." She turned to address the assembled community. "What happened here today was a deliberate attempt to destroy something beautiful we're building together. Someone who believes profit matters more than people tried to take away our project, our bakery, our future." Murmurs of anger rippled through the crowd. "But they miscalculated." Sarah continued, finding strength in the faces before her. "They thought destroying the building would destroy our resolve. They were wrong. This bakery isn't just wood and plaster. It's a symbol of what Millbrook was and can be again. A community that supports each other, that builds rather than tears down, that values connection over competition." Jake moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and grounding. "Sarah's right. We've faced setbacks before: plant closures, economic downturns, personal losses. Each time Millbrook has rebuilt together. This is no different." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her teacher's authority silencing the crowd. "Well, I, for one, am not letting some corporate shark in a fancy suit tell us what we can and cannot have in our town. My husband was a carpenter for 40 years. I'll be here tomorrow morning with his tools. My brothers and I can handle the heavy lifting," offered a young man Sarah recognized as one of Jake's garage customers. "I'll bring food for the workers," Maggie announced. "Can't rebuild on empty stomachs." One by one, townspeople stepped forward with offers of help, skills, materials, time support. What Henderson had intended as a devastating blow was instead becoming a rallying point, unifying the community in defiance of corporate callousness. As the impromptu planning session continued, Sarah's phone rang an unknown number with a Chicago area code. Wellington, she answered, stepping outside for privacy. Having some renovation troubles? Henderson's voice dripped with false concern. Such a shame after all that community effort. But perhaps it's a sign that Wellington Foods should focus on what it does best: profitable food production at scale, not small-town nostalgia projects. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. You won't get away with this, Richard. What you've done isn't just unethical, it's illegal. Property damage, fraud, corporate sabotage. Strong accusations, Henderson replied smoothly, but difficult to prove, especially against a company of our resources. Face reality, Sarah. The board approved your little project as a courtesy, not a commitment. When it inevitably fails, they'll remember who offered a stable, profitable alternative. You're wrong, Sarah stated firmly. About the board, about Wellington Foods, about what matters. And I'm going to prove it. Henderson's laugh held no humor. Always the idealist. Your father was the same way, all high-minded principles, until reality intervened. He died, disappointed Sarah. Don't follow his path. The mention of her father sparked something in Sarah, not anger, but clarity. My father wasn't disappointed in his principles, Richard. He was disappointed in how people like you corrupted them. But I'm going to set that right. She ended the call and turned to find Jake standing in the doorway, his expression telling her he'd heard enough. Henderson, he asked simply. Sarah nodded, sliding the phone back into her pocket. He thinks he's won. Has he? Sarah looked past Jake to the community gathered inside the damaged bakery, already organizing cleanup crews, making material lists, planning reconstruction. Emma sat on a salvaged chair, solemnly drawing a new design for the kids' corner, while Mrs. Patterson took notes. No, Sarah said with absolute certainty. He's only made us stronger. Jake's eyes held hers, searching for truth. This fight could get uglier. Henderson clearly has no limits. Neither do we, Sarah countered. But our strength isn't in corporate maneuvers or legal tactics. It's in this, she gestured to the scene behind him, community purpose, people working together towards something meaningful. Jake's expression softened. Sarah Wellington, when did you become such an idealist? When a small-town mechanic and his daughter reminded me what really matters. She took his hand, drawing strength from his calloused palm against hers. I'm not backing down, Jake. Not from Henderson, not from this project, not from us. Are you still with me? His answer was in the way he pulled her close, in the determination that matched her own, in the quiet certainty of his voice when he said, all the way. Inside, they rejoined the community planning session, now evolved into a full-scale reconstruction strategy. What had been a methodical renovation was transforming into a community barn-raising of sorts, a collective commitment to rebuild faster and better than before. As Sarah listened to the ideas flowing around her, a new plan began forming in her mind, not just for the bakery's reconstruction, but for neutralizing Henderson once and for all. It would require courage, strategic thinking, and absolute commitment to the values Wellington Foods had been founded upon. Jake, she said quietly while the others continued planning, I need to go back to Chicago one more time. Concern flickered across his face. Henderson needs to be confronted directly, Sarah finished, not just for the bakery's sake, but for Wellington Foods' future. What he's doing violates everything the company should stand for. What are you planning? Sarah's expression was resolute. Something my father should have done years ago. Remind everyone what Wellington Foods was meant to be and show them what it can become again. Jake studied her face, seeing the determination there. When do we leave? Not we, Sarah corrected gently. Mithagini, I need you here leading the reconstruction, showing everyone that no matter what Henderson throws at us, we keep building. Jake clearly wanted to argue, but recognized the logic of her strategy. Promise me you'll be careful. Henderson's already proven he'll play dirty. I'm counting on it, Sarah replied, a glint of steel in her eyes. It's time Henderson learned that principles aren't weaknesses. They're the strongest foundation of all. As the afternoon faded into evening, Sarah stood in the center of the damaged bakery, watching the community of Millbrook transform destruction into possibility. Children collected salvageable materials while their parents measured and planned. Elderly residents shared stories of the original bakery, ensuring its spirit would inform the reconstruction. In the midst of this activity, Emma approached Sarah with a drawing clutched in her small hand. I made this for you, she said solemnly, for when you go fight the bad man in Chicago. Sarah knelt to accept the artwork, a crayon rendering of three figures holding hands in front of a building labeled Our Bakery. The tallest figure wore what appeared to be a cape. Is that me? Sarah asked, pointing to the cape figure. Emma nodded earnestly. You're the hero. Heroes need capes when they fight bad guys. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. This is the best gift I've ever received, Emma. I'll keep it with me for courage. Daddy says you're the bravest person he knows, Emma confided. Even braver than firefighters, and they're super brave. Sarah glanced across the room to where Jake was organizing a work crew, his natural leadership evident in how people responded to his quiet authority. He caught her looking and smiled, a private communication of support and something deeper that made her heart swell. Your daddy's pretty brave himself, Sarah told Emma, and so are you. That night, as Sarah prepared for her return to Chicago, she and Jake stood on his back porch, the weight of impending confrontation balanced by the strength of their connection. What exactly are you planning? Jake asked, his arm around her shoulders against the autumn chill. Sarah leaned into his warmth. Henderson's vulnerable in a way he doesn't realize. He's so focused on quarterly profits and shareholder value that he's forgotten what builds lasting success, trust, community purpose beyond profit. I'm going to remind the board and our shareholders what Wellington Foods was founded to be. And if it doesn't work, she turned to face him, framing his face with her hands. Then I walk away from Wellington Foods with my integrity intact, and we build something new together, something that honors my father's true legacy and your vision for community-centered business. Jake pressed his forehead to hers. Either way, you come back to us. Always, Sarah promised. You and Emma are my home now. Nothing Henderson does can change that. Their kiss held the weight of commitment beyond romance, a partnership of values, vision, and shared purpose that no corporate battle could diminish. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and challenge, but tonight, in this moment of connection, Sarah Wellington knew with absolute certainty that she'd already won the most important victory of all, finding where she truly belonged. 1 year later, the Wellington family bakery gleamed in the spring sunshine, its restored brick facade and polished windows a testament to what determination and community could accomplish. The grand reopening banner fluttered in the gentle breeze, announcing today's celebration to a town already buzzing with anticipation. Inside, Sarah adjusted a display of freshly baked cinnamon rolls, her grandmother's recipe, the one that had started everything. The recipe book from the hidden tin now occupied a place of honor in a glass case on the wall, alongside photographs documenting 3 generations of Wellington bakers and the recent community restoration effort. Nervous? Jake asked, appearing beside her with a tray of artisan bread still warm from the oven. Sarah smiled, the expression coming easily now, after months of genuine happiness. Not nervous, just taking it in. Sometimes I still can't believe we're actually here. Believe it, Jake said, setting down the tray to slip an arm around her waist. You made it happen. We made it happen, Sarah corrected, leaning into his embrace. All of us. The journey from that day of destruction to this morning of celebration had been neither quick nor easy. After Henderson's attack on the bakery, Sarah had indeed returned to Chicago for one final confrontation, but not in the boardroom as Henderson had expected. Instead, she'd called a press conference inviting national business media, local Illinois papers, and key shareholders. There, with Emma's crayon drawing displayed prominently beside her, Sarah had told the full story. Wellington Foods' history as a community-centered business, her father's vision for ethical growth, Henderson's underhanded tactics to maintain power at any cost, and the resilience of a small town determined to rebuild. The publicity had been immediate and overwhelming. Henderson had underestimated the power of narrative in the age of social media. The image of corporate raiders destroying a beloved community bakery, juxtaposed against local volunteers rebuilding it together, had resonated far beyond Millbrook. Shareholders had called for investigations, the board had demanded explanations, and Henderson had found himself suddenly scrambling to justify actions that, exposed to daylight, appeared not just unethical, but potentially illegal. In the ensuing months, as Henderson fought for his professional survival, Sarah had divided her time between corporate reform in Chicago and community rebuilding in Millbrook. The legal challenges to the bakery project had evaporated in the face of public scrutiny, and reconstruction had proceeded with remarkable speed, fueled by volunteer labor and donations from across the region. Now, as Sarah surveyed the finished bakery, its gleaming counters, state-of-the-art kitchen, comfortable seating areas, and the special children's corner Emma had designed, she felt a sense of completion that transcended mere business success. "Mom, Dad, they're starting to line up outside." Emma burst through the kitchen doors, her face alight with excitement. The mom was still new, officially adopted just 3 months ago, after Sarah and Jake's winter wedding, but Emma used it with the easy confidence of a child who knew exactly where she belonged. Sarah checked her watch. 15 minutes until opening. "Is everything ready?" "Mrs. Patterson has the ribbon-cutting scissors," Emma reported importantly. "Dr. Martinez brought his camera for the newspaper, and Maggie says the celebration cakes are perfect." "Then I guess we're ready," Jake said, adjusting his tie, a concession to the formality of the occasion that made Sarah smile, knowing how much he preferred his garage coveralls. The three of them walked to the front door together, a family unit forged through unexpected circumstances, but strengthened by shared purpose and genuine love. Outside, it seemed as if the entire town of Millbrook had gathered, families with children, elderly residents leaning on canes, former plant workers wearing their old Wellington Foods caps in solidarity. At precisely 9 a.m., Mrs. Patterson stepped forward with the ceremonial scissors, her teacher's voice silencing the excited crowd. For over 50 years, the Wellington Family Bakery was the heart of Millbrook, a place where we celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, debated politics, and found community in the simple act of breaking bread together. When it closed, a piece of our town's soul went with it. She turned to Sarah with a warm smile. "Today, thanks to Sarah Wellington, now Sarah Wellington Morrison, and our own Jake Morrison, that heart beats again. Not just as a bakery, but as a symbol of what happens when people choose connection over profit, community over convenience, rebuilding over retreat." The crowd applauded as Mrs. Patterson handed the scissors to Sarah, Jake, and Emma, who together cut the ribbon stretching across the bakery entrance. As the doors opened for business for the first time in decades, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness, as if the universe had conspired to bring her exactly where she needed to be. The day passed in a blur of joyful chaos. Continuous lines of customers shared stories of the original bakery children wide-eyed at Emma's reading corner. Elderly patrons moved to tears by tastes that transported them to childhood. Sarah moved through it all in a state of grateful wonder, occasionally catching Jake's eye across the room and exchanging smiles that needed no words. Late afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Walter Jenkins, now serving as Millbrook's mayor, escorting a distinguished older woman Sarah recognized immediately from board photographs. "Ms. Yamamoto," Sarah greeted her, surprised and slightly wary. The Yamamoto deal had proceeded under new leadership at Wellington Foods, but Sarah's reduced role as Community Investment Director rather than CEO had limited her involvement. Akiko Yamamoto bowed slightly, her elegant bearing unmistakable, even in the casual bakery setting. "Ms. Wellington Morrison, I hope my unexpected visit is not an intrusion on your celebration." "Not at all," Sarah assured her, leading them to a quieter corner table. "I'm honored, but surprised." "I wanted to see for myself," Ms. Yamamoto explained, accepting the coffee Jake brought over. "This small bakery that changed the direction of a multinational corporation." That unseated Richard Henderson. A hint of amusement touched her normally composed features. "That was most satisfying to witness, I must admit." Sarah smiled, remembering the emergency board meeting where Henderson, facing evidence of his unethical tactics against the Millbrook project, had been forced to resign. He underestimated the power of community. "As many do," Ms. Yamamoto agreed, surveying the bustling bakery. "In Japan, we understand that business success comes not just from efficiency, but from harmony with employees, with community, with tradition. Your father understood this, I think." "He did," Sarah confirmed. "It took me longer to learn the lesson." Miss Yamamoto nodded thoughtfully. "The partnership between Yamamoto Foods and Wellington Foods proceeds well, but I wondered if you might consider extending your community investment model to our joint ventures. Perhaps beginning in rural Japan, where many communities face challenges similar to Millbrook." The proposal caught Sarah by surprise. She had intentionally stepped back from day-to-day operations at Wellington Foods corporate, choosing instead to focus on the Millbrook project and similar initiatives in neighboring communities. But an international expansion of the model held intriguing possibilities. "I would be very interested in discussing that further," Sarah said carefully, "though my primary commitment remains here." "Of course," Ms. Yamamoto smiled. Balance is essential. I see you have found yours. After the distinguished visitor departed, Sarah found Jake and Emma in the kitchen preparing for the evening rush. The sight of them working together, Jake teaching Emma how to shape dinner rolls with the same patient care he'd once shown explaining engine parts, filled her heart with contentment. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, noticing her watching them. "Everything's perfect," Sarah assured him. "Ms. Yamamoto was impressed with what we've built here. She's interested in expanding the community investment model internationally." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like an opportunity." "It is," Sarah acknowledged, "but one that would require travel consultation time away from here." Jake wiped flour from his hands, approaching her with a thoughtful expression. "Sarah, when you crashed into our lives in that broken-down Mercedes, you were all career and no balance. Now you've swung pretty far in the other direction. Is that bad?" "Not bad," Jake corrected, "but maybe not completely sustainable either. You have gifts the world needs. Vision leadership, the ability to bridge corporate efficiency with community values. Finding the right balance doesn't mean abandoning either world completely." Sarah studied his face, still marveling at how this man could see her so clearly, he understand her so completely. "You wouldn't mind if I took on some consulting work, even if it meant occasional travel?" "Mind, I'd be proud," Jake said simply. "Besides, Emma and I could come with you sometimes. She's been asking to ride on an airplane." "I want to see Japan," Emma chimed in, clearly having listened to the entire conversation while pretending to focus on her dinner rolls. "Do they have bakeries there too?" Sarah laughed, pulling them both into a flour-dusted embrace. "They do. Different kinds of bread, but the same idea, bringing people together around food and connection." The bakery closed at 7 p.m., having completely sold out of every item, despite Emma's confident assertions that they had baked enough for 100 years. As Jake flipped the sign to closed, Sarah took a moment to stand in the center of the space, absorbing the satisfied quiet after a day of celebration. The original Wellington Family Bakery had been reborn, but as something more, not just a business, but a community anchor. The restored building now housed not only the bakery, but also a small cafe, a community meeting space, and in the back rooms, a training facility where former plant workers were learning artisanal food production for the growing network of Wellington Community Partnerships. "Penny for your thoughts," Jake said, dimming the main lights, while leaving the warm glow of pendant lamps above the seating areas. "I was thinking about my father," Sarah admitted. "How much he would have loved seeing this place come alive again. How right he was about what matters." Jake nodded, understanding as always. "I think he'd be proudest of who you've become, not just what you've built." Emma emerged from the kitchen, her small apron covered in flour despite their best efforts at cleanliness. "Can we stay a little longer? I want to show Princess Whiskers the kids' corner." As if summoned by her name, the calico cat appeared from the storeroom where she had established herself as the bakery's unofficial rodent control officer after finally deciding humans were trustworthy. She approached Emma with dignified caution, accepting gentle scratches behind her ears, before following the child to inspect the reading nook with its child-sized furniture and well-stocked bookshelves. "She moved from the garage to the bakery pretty easily," Jake observed, watching the pair. "She knows where she's needed," Sarah replied. "Smart cat." They sat together at a corner table, shoulders touching, watching Emma read aloud to Princess Whiskers with the serious concentration of a child determined to share the joy of stories. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life," Sarah confessed quietly. "A year ago, I was alone in that penthouse defining success by acquisitions and market share." "Any regrets?" Jake asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sarah turned to meet his gaze directly. "Not one. Breaking down in Millbrook was the best wrong turn I ever took." Later that evening, after Emma was tucked into bed with stories and stuffed animals, Sarah and Jake sat on their back porch, swinging a habit that had survived their transition from dating to marriage. The spring air carried the scent of apple blossoms from the small orchard they'd planted behind the house, another connection to the Wellington tradition of locally sourced ingredients. "So," Jake said, his arm comfortable around her shoulders, "international community investment consultant by day, small-town baker by night. Quite the career evolution." Sarah laughed softly. "Not exactly what I planned when I got my MBA." "Plans change," Jake observed. "Sometimes for the better." "Definitely for the better." Sarah rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the familiar sounds of their Millbrook evening, distant train whistles, neighborhood dogs barking the creak of the porch swing. Your father would be proud, Jake said again, seeming to read her thoughts. Sarah nodded. I think he knew somehow. Leaving that recipe in the letter, it's like he was giving me directions back to what mattered. And your mother, what would she think of all this? Sarah considered the question. Her mother had passed when Sarah was in college, a quiet presence overshadowed in memory by her father's larger personality. She'd love you and Emma, she said finally. She always valued family above everything else. It took me a long time to understand why. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled completely over their yard, the first stars appearing in the clear spring skyline. From Emma's room came the soft sound of her talking in her sleep, a habit that always made them smile with its glimpse into her active imagination. You know, Jake said thoughtfully, when my father was dying, he told me something I didn't understand at the time. He said, success isn't what you build, son, it's what builds you. I think I finally get it. Sarah squeezed his hand. Wise man, your father. Like daughter, like father, Jake teased, pressing a kiss to her temple. The porch swing creaked gently as they rocked two people who had found in each other not just love, but shared purpose, mutual respect, and a vision of success that transcended balance sheets and quarterly reports. Inside their home, a child dreamed of bakeries and adventures. In town, a community slept more soundly, knowing its heart beat strongly again. And in Chicago, a corporation began the slow work of rediscovering its founding values, guided by the unexpected legacy of a broken-down Mercedes and the CEO who had found her way home by getting thoroughly lost. What do you think happens next? Sarah asked, not really expecting an answer. Jake's smile was audible in his voice. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to finding out together. Above them, a shooting star traced a brief, brilliant path across the night sky, not an omen or a sign, but a moment of beauty shared between two people who had learned to pause long enough to notice such things. In that moment of quiet wonder, Sarah Wellington Morrison knew with absolute certainty that success wasn't measured in dollars or titles or acquisitions. Success was this, a hand to hold in the darkness, a child sleeping safely nearby, work that mattered, and a community to call home. Everything else was just details. Together, she agreed the word both answer and promise. That's the only plan that matters.